This podcast is part of the Big Heads Media Podcast Network. Go to bigheadsmedia.com for more great podcasts.
Hello and welcome to Body Count, a history podcast where we gab about death and disaster through the ages, highlighting figures, single events, time periods, whatever it may be that resulted in someone, or as is usually the case, a lot of someone's dying. I am your host, Jessica Manor, joined as always by my co-hostess,
Cara DiDomizio, and we are excited tonight because we are about to finally go deep into history, because I've given you guys so much foreplay with deep into history that we're making it happen tonight. And Arjun, we're all about to chat about one of Jessica and I's ultimate history daddies, Julius Caesar.
Julius Caesar.
And we're going to talk about the demise, which is pretty timely because we're recording this just a few days short of the Ides of March here. So
Indeed.
Before we go into that, I want you to tell us where we can find your podcast and what it is you do.
Deep into History is available everywhere on every podcast platform as well as YouTube. You can find me at Deep into History on Twitter and Instagram. Get your daily blast from the past. I do history a little bit differently than most people. I take the narrative point of view, take the human perspective, and try to put you in the shoes of the people experiencing the story. I like to say I take you on a trip like no one else can, because I actually research every facet of daily life and everything, and I'll put you on the battlefield. I will put you in a little boy's shoes running away from a Sibyl giving an awesome prophecy. I can take you anywhere I wish to. So come experience history like you never have before. Listen to Deep into History.
And we just went deep into history. That is, man, of all the intros for a podcast, you just nailed it. Woo!
I know. Like a radio show in the best of ways. Like a radio show I would tune in every single week at 7:00 just to hear. Like,
Thank you. I appreciate that.
It's like a sexier Orson Welles that we got, but only of history there. And if any of you have to look up who Orson Welles is, shame on you. Just kidding.
Shame.
Well, I want you guys to know, surprise, surprise. And in honor of my appearance on the epic Body Count, I will be releasing an episode based on my notes that I made for this show on the Ides of March on March 15th. So experience the assassination of Julius Caesar first here and then on Deep into History.
Yes.
And what I like about Arjun's show for people listening is that he really does truly do a narrative really well. Like, you know how there's shows that just basically spit out a lecture at you? That's not it.
Mm-mm.
If you listen to an entire one of his episodes and don't feel some sort of way after it, I don't know if you're human. You know,
Because
like he has you feeling up, down, all kinds of like emotions in a single episode. And he talks about a lot of the ancient world's most interesting subjects. So it's a great place, like if you're like wanting to dive into something from the ancient world and you're like, I don't really know, or it's a great podcast to start with for that, in my opinion.
And for our listeners, I think they'll love it. One, because it's different, very different from how I would tell a story. We're on the outside looking in. Arjun's exactly right. You're in this. You are in this story with him as these people experiencing all of this. And then also deep into history is no lie, because this is where you're going to get all your ancient world's history. Those things that I'm not good at, Arjun is great at. So
Ancient world, Sengoku Japan, Middle Ages. I'm going to be, in the coming months, we will be moving right to the 20th century, doing a true crime podcast like no other. When I take you and you experience the tale of Tony Accardo, you will become a mob boss. Just wait for that, coming this November.
I am so excited.
And the Italian part of me is like all kinds of like excited.
Trust me, I'm taking my time with that and piecing it together. I've interviewed a reporter who tried to follow him in Chicago, so I've got little tidbits about how he ran his operation. So it's gonna be good. It's gonna be a wild ride.
I can
Wow.
basically see Kara like making meatballs like Clemenza right now, Godfather style. She just got so excited. I saw the stars in her eyes.
Kara,
would
if you have
say-
an authentic tomato sauce recipe, please share it because I need a good one.
I'll have to reference Nana, but she learned from the best of the Italian side, so we'll have to refer to her there. But in any case, although to take it back to the Italian peninsula,
Oh, yes.
let's set the stage, because how in the world did Julius Caesar, who at this point seemed to be not invincible, I would say, but he was at the pinnacle of his power, right? Like, he had finished his Spanish campaigns. He had finished, a lot. Well, he had taken care of. How do I put taken care of? What's a good phrasing? How would you go into Egypt? Because I don't want to put taking care of Cleopatra, because it's not how I mean.
Well, he did take care of business.
Oh, yeah. Neutralized, maybe. I don't know. What is the good word for that?
Well, I guess he took care of the situation, I guess, going on in Egypt. Although one would argue, from a nationalistic point of view, he allowed them more independence. So,
Well, I would call it the most suave occupation in history because he had 4 legions
Oh, yeah.
stationed in Egypt, yet nominally Cleopatra was the queen.
yeah, well, and it's so interesting because, like, Cleopatra, she was in exile at the time that Julius Caesar comes to Egypt. Like, she was not in charge. She and her siblings, for anyone that needs a little backstory, were feuding, as good Ptolemaics do. All of the Ptolemies basically have a love-hate relationship, quite literally in some cases, with their siblings,
with each other,
and with their parents. And that being said, because you had many, many factions and eunuchs that supported different factions, you had all these rivalries building up. Now, Cleopatra, her sister Arsinoe, I think is how it's pronounced, and there's a famous Ptolemaic queen, Arsinoe II, who was pretty significant in Ptolemaic Egypt. But basically, Cleopatra had 2 sisters and she had several brothers, and one of her brothers and sisters wanted to take the throne from Cleopatra. Now, that being said, the problem Egypt, and why are we getting to Egypt when we're talking Caesar? Well, it's really hard. You can't, especially when Cleopatra was installed across the river from him at the time of the assassination, you can't quite remove her from the narrative, because it will give many, many an enemy in Rome an idea of what kind of aspirations did Julius Caesar have. Did he want to be royalty? And here's the thing, even though the title of dictator was in fact a title, it was always meant to be temporary. And that being said, there is always this Rome has no king kind of undercurrent in the Senate. And from his, how I put it, suave, as Arjun would say, romance with Cleopatra that was both political in nature and fostered at least one child, Caesarion, which there's a lot of controversy on if he ever actually acknowledged the child or not, because there's one source that said he, at a dinner party, when she visited Rome, picked him up, but to many that didn't actually mean he was, I guess, acknowledging him. So, long story short, Cleopatra's relationship with Caesar would spark a lot of rumors about Caesar's intentions. It gave the impression that he was also getting involved with decisions that should be made by the Senate. When you think of geographically where Egypt was, the hope was Egypt would be a client state because they were basically the breadbasket for the Mediterranean. And Cleopatra's father had a really interesting relationship with Caesar's rival general, Pompey. Pompey, after basically, in a nutshell, there was a civil war. Pompey, Caesar. Pompey goes to Egypt thinking he's going to be able to escape, but we'll put it this way. Cleopatra's brother's advisors say, no, let's just chop off his head and present it as a token of something for Julius Caesar, thinking that it would put them in his favor. However, and I think people underestimate that he would have had a relationship with Pompey in the sense that his daughter was married to Pompey, and he loved his daughter dearly. And even though they had been at odds for years, and I would say it was a masterclass in ego and might.
Oh,
Truly.
yes.
I would say at the end of the day, I think Caesar was pissed that somebody took the opportunity, away from, in my argument, from granting clemency, because that was one of the things that will come to roost very, very soon in the people
Mhm.
that Julius Caesar would grant clemency to. Now, would anyone like to pick up? Because I didn't mean to rant. I'm sorry, guys. I
Oh,
really
don't
am.
worry.
I
No, that was
got
great.
super into it.
It was
and
great. You're right. We can't separate it completely. It has to give us, we have to kind of have that background of painting a picture of what the perception is going into what we're going to talk about and why it's such a point of contention and why that's going to be important. So you didn't ramble. You laid the foundation, Kara. You just gave us a sexy cornerstone of a story.
There you go.
Yeah, it wasn't as sexy as it could have been, all things considered, with the sources talking about like rolling up in a carpet. I mean, and so basically, Caesar decides to stay in Egypt, and honestly, he probably should have gone back to Rome, but he didn't, and he gets involved in a familial dispute. So basically, he becomes the guy in charge of now mitigating a second civil war, but not a Roman civil war this time, civil war in Egypt. And again, if I were a senator, I would feel a little bit weird that even though he wrote about his campaign, what is he doing? You know what I mean? Getting involved with Cleopatra. What is he doing deciding she's going to be in charge of Egypt? Who's
Well,
to say?
he had to, because from my understanding is that particularly her brother's faction wasn't necessarily guaranteeing the grain supply. He needed a ruler in Egypt that could guarantee the grain supply, because he had to consult after Egypt. He had to deal with North Africa, where there was a North African campaign. Then he had to go to Spain to deal with Pompey's sons.
Yep.
And he needed a steady flow of grain. Egypt had to be stable, because
A logistics point of view.
Yeah, well, like the second people start going hungry in Rome, people get they start rioting, and suddenly your new ruler doesn't look so good. So it not only that, it was a huge political win for him. The notion that he had gone to Egypt and conquered it, in all but name,
Conquered it.
Oh, he conquered.
He came, he saw, he conquered in most cases.
Not
just in Egypt. That's the interesting thing. He was a
No.
very exceptional general. And one of the things I think that's very understated for Julius Caesar is his engineering capabilities. He was brilliant. I would argue that's what gave him the definitive advantage over many an opponent. Now, there are those that really hate his treatment in Gaul, and rightfully so. I can understand why, but one cannot understate the brilliance of his tactics and the brilliance of him as an entity. I would argue,
Right.
and that's what was threatening, right? Like, how do you put it when you have somebody that's a bright star, whether it be in politics, whether it be in Hollywood, whether it be in any career, like when you're in the office and you're gearing for something and you're saying, I'm going to get that promotion. And then somebody comes along that's just naturally good at whatever it is. I think it's a human capacity to feel threatened. And
Oh, yes.
Julius Caesar, I mean, he was a patrician, but he wasn't an obvious, I think, choice from his childhood experience. I don't think, from sources we have very little to minimal knowledge about what happened prior to age 13. We know about him being a brilliant orator because his big public outing was giving a speech at his aunt's funeral. And that was what set the stage. So you have somebody that's a good orator. You have somebody that's naturally good with people, and that would give him populist edge, frankly. And that's one of the things. He could turn and inspire loyalty in his men and the general public of Rome. And that's dangerous if you're a senator. That's
Mhm.
really dangerous.
Oh, he also so like he comes out of the era of Marius and Sulla,
Mm.
which I'm doing a series on coincidentally.
Yes, seriously, guys, check it
It's
out.
called Verses. Check it out. Because it's impossible to understand, just like Kara was saying, it's impossible to understand Julius Caesar or Vercingetorix unless you learn, the world that they were born into. And Marius was the aunt. Kara just mentioned was Julia Maria, Gaius Marius's wife. And Marius was his uncle. And apparently Sulla was his uncle too, because there's a tantalizing tidbit that his daughter Cornelia was born to his first wife, who was a girl named Julia. So my theory about Caesar was that he spent his life, even though because the Marians lost and the populares, which were the sort of the popular, the people's movement was crushed, Caesar tried to emulate both men. Without going as absolutely crazy as they did when they took power, meaning they didn't have prescriptions like mass murderers, which might have been his downfall also, because
No, he was
Augustus
more
subsequently learned the lesson, and they prescribed everybody. So
Yeah.
I mean,
I think if you win, vanquish your foes is a good lesson from the Roman times anyway.
oh, 100%.
Yes.
If you allow your enemies to live, they're just going to live to fight you another day. That's what the lesson from ancient Rome is in almost any case. What do you think, what do you see more in Julius Caesar? I know you said he hinted at tendencies from both Sulla and Marius. Who do you think, if you had to choose, he emulated more?
That's a tough question. I would say militarily. Logistically, he was like Marius. Tactically, he was like Sulla. As a leader, on the battlefield, he was 100%. I think a lot like Gaius Marius. Because not only that, as he fought his way up the ranks like Gaius Marius did, he entered the cursus honorum, which was for anyone who doesn't know, that's how Rome had a structure for how you achieve high office, the consulship being the pinnacle. But to enter it, you'd start as a military tribune. There was a military path and there was a political path. And Julius Caesar took the military path up the cursus honorum, just like Gaius Marius, which meant like he was literally involved in hand-to-hand combat for at least a decade before he got really, really important commands where he could kind of sit back and command men. And although in his case there were a few exceptions, so I would say that he kind of modeled his life along Marius, because if you think of any child who looks up to like a famous uncle, or they would naturally emulate them. But in the end, Sulla won the war, and Sulla spared his life. So there are definite traces of Sulla in him, in his ability to deal with the patricians. Because he had that. The patricians were the nobility of Rome, the 1%, if you will. And Caesar had an ability to move between worlds seamlessly, just like Sulla did too. Even though Sulla was the patrician's patrician, he could move in between worlds seamlessly. And Julius Caesar had that idea, which is what gave him that air that I'm a man of the people. Even though at times he really wasn't. I think he came to the realization that Marius, although he did represent the popular party, at the end of the day wasn't a man of the people. And Caesar tried to actually do stuff more. And that comes into like the idea of like the grain dole. One of his first orders once he had won the Civil War was to divide up 20,000 acres of land and give that to the poor of Rome. So he was proposing actual reforms. Of course, we'll never know. But yeah, so like if we want to set up the kind of or the time around the Ides of March, you introed it beautifully. Let me lay out like what the tensions of that time, because as you
Yes.
said, Julius Caesar was at the pinnacle of his power by any metric. Cleopatra was living at a villa across from Rome, overlooking Rome.
Mhm.
His queen was there. Caesarion was there. She was known as his chief mistress. So this is approximately like 49 days before the assassination. Let's
And
just
mind you, the whole
do a
her
timetable.
being a queen thing, they also installed a statue, and I believe it was supposed to be Aphrodite, but modeled like Cleopatra, if I'm
Oh,
not mistaken.
it was Cleopatra. I have that in like as one of the insults that they got kind of angry at. But let me just just show you the kind of tension. Okay, so about 2 months before he's actually assassinated, on the 18th of March, he was supposed to launch the Parthian campaign. Famously, Crassus, the former triumvirate, was Crassus, Pompey, the richest man in Rome, Crassus, Pompey, and Caesar. Crassus lacked military credentials, at least in the popular imagination, even though he was integral in putting down Spartacus. So he wanted the one thing he didn't have, which was military laurels. And to get that, he decided a good thing to do would be invade Parthia, which was a very powerful nation, and they crushed his legions. It was one of the worst defeats Rome ever suffered. His legionary eagles were taken, and
Which
it is said,
bad.
which is the
Super
ultimate
bad.
insult. And it is said that when they captured, sources argue about this, but it is said that when he was captured, they poured molten gold down his throat to kill him.
Which inspires, by the way, Game of Thrones, I might add.
Yep.
That's where that inspiration
Just so
comes
we
from.
all know.
Exactly. So that was the fact that they took the eagles was an insult to all of Rome. So Caesar had to get the eagles back to get their honor back. So he was assembling like the largest army he would ever command, over 100,000 troops, 16 legions, 10,000 cavalry. He had the campaign mapped out. This lost to history, but apparently beautifully, to counter the Parthian tactics by massing scorpions, which were bolt throwers, to counter the famous Parthian cavalry. And he planned, these were all fresh legions, and he planned to kind of bloody them, like get them used to combat, by taking out a tribe that lived across the Danube. So they'd go across Europe to across the Danube and kill this tribe called the Getae, then move on to Parthia, and then this was his plan. He'd go retrieve the lost eagles, subjugate Parthia if they could, and then march all the way around the Caspian Sea back through Germany and into Gaul. It was a 3-year planned campaign, and the idea being that not only would they retrieve the eagles, but they would subdue every tribe there, so Rome wouldn't be threatened for generations on that path. So this was ready. This was ready to go. Because he was Pontifex Maximus, it was an auspicious day because the 18th of March was a celebration to the war god Mars, and he was supposed to leave then. So that's why it was felt that they had to kill him before he left, because if he came back victorious, there would be no stopping him.
Yeah.
And I might add, I had a question for you. How do you think Caesar went about choosing the people he surrounded himself with, a la Mark Antony? Because it's always been curious to me, especially with all the Shakespearean lore on Antony, which I disagree with so hard.
Hard and heavy.
Why do you think, I mean, who were Caesar's allies that he had in Rome, and why did he, I guess, select who he did, in your opinion?
Are you referring to like at this time or during
At this time?
At this time? I think by this time he was given into sycophancy was a big thing for Julius Caesar, because at this time, critically, in a court, like, it's counter to a lot of the narratives, as you said, about Mark Antony. At this time, they weren't that close. In fact, Mark Antony was kind of out of favor with Caesar, because he was
I wonder
because
why.
he had a lot of debauched behavior while he was his master of horse.
That's
Um,
mild,
yeah,
a mild
like I
way of
mean,
describing Antony.
yeah,
I
like
just always say Mark Antony is far from housebroken. And when you're where you are right now, if you're Caesar, you don't want, a mad dog. You don't want somebody that's not housebroken. He's useful in some places. He is not useful in Rome at this time.
Right, absolutely. I think the best way to consider him is muscle. He was an intimidating presence, but he was no as like people have read his later history. He was no great general, but individually, as a fighter commanding a small unit, he was incredibly effective. And he had a massive intimidation factor, and crucially, the love of the people. People loved him. They loved that he was debauched. They loved him walking down the street drunk, throwing out denarii to the public. Like they loved Antony. Antony would be a hard man to touch, but in particular at this time, Caesar he wasn't in favor, and Caesar crucially he was a great delegator, but initially, but what happened as time went on, and you can see, I'm not going to say that he had paranoid rule, because if he did, he wouldn't have allowed this many enemies to live, but you can
And he
see,
wouldn't have been assassinated by, I don't know, that many people.
right, exactly. And you can see it in his actions that he was very good at picking people who were good for the job. And I think that's how he intended to rule. I honestly think that he had kind of deluded himself to the point where he believed that um, the people he'd given clemency to all was forgotten and forgiven, and he could get away with anything. And to a point, he was right, because he had the legions, and all they had were the quote unquote men of quality. Caesar had the mob. Caesar had the plebs with him. But crucially, it's during these 49 days before the assassination where that starts to deteriorate, and these nobles see their opening. Yeah. So that's what I think about that.
Yeah. No, I agree 110%. That's good. Yeah. That paints the picture so everybody can kind of wrap their head around why things seem to take a far left turn here all of a sudden.
Why do you think his enemies, to be devil's advocate, even though I'm more pro Caesar typically, however, why do you think the senators, I guess, especially why did people like Brutus, that he had at one point an established relationship with, end up, in short, defecting to Pompey, and then, in short, being given clemency?
Well, okay, so a lot of people think that, but what it was that Brutus was in fact being loyal to the Republic, right? Pompey represented the Republic. He had the Senate with him. The Senate supported him. So Caesar was the rebel, if you think about it in that context, right?
I don't like thinking of Caesar as Franco, but in this particular situation, I mean, Franco was the rebel against the democratically elected government too. So yeah, I guess
Right.
in that case, Brutus would be, and I know that isn't how popular conception frames him, right?
And
They,
also lifelong friends, or long time people who had established relationships with, Titus Labienus, who commanded his cavalry so well in Gaul, defected with all of his cavalry to Pompey, because the idea of attacking the Republic. Remember, the Republic was itself divine to many Romans. They were very pious, and religion comes in big in his demise. But also, the very act of offering them clemency and them accepting it was kind of an insult, because even though they wanted to live and they took it, it was a shame, because the Romans had this concept called virtus, which was the warrior code of their people, and it did not allow for surrender. It did not allow. If you've noticed, every war the Romans fought, they just kept coming. They will fight to the death, because they will not surrender. It does not allow for it, because that loss of face would be just something
you're expected
impossible to
kill
live
yourself, basically. You're almost
Yeah.
considered to die by the sword.
Right.
Which, spoiler alert, that's part of the reason Mark Antony would have killed himself after Actium, not just being all sad about Cleopatra,
Yeah.
Because actually, no, that would have been a Roman thing to do after you suffer a massive defeat, right? Like you said, Roman concept doesn't allow for the concept of clemency because it's almost like, how do I put it? It's shameful. It's begging almost.
Yes, like to exactly. So they were fighting for the Republic. In their eyes, the Republic died when Caesar became dictator. But they had a hope that he would be a dictator, like Sulla would be a dictator for a time. Traditionally, it was like dictator was an honorable position. You'd take it for 6 months and then give back the power to the people after 6 months, and you were forever honored for doing that. Sulla took that and became dictator for a year, right? By the time we're getting to our time, Caesar's already been dictator for 3 years.
So they're
So
starting to get like, this is concerning.
Plus, he's
This is-
about to launch a campaign that's going to make him a god, basically.
Yeah,
if he pulls that off,
he's
yeah.
gonna be full
Absolutely.
Alexander mode, right? Like at that point.
if he had conquered Parthia, had that campaign been successful, world history would be completely different than now.
Yes.
Like, it would be completely different. Because think about this. If you the constant pressure that came from the barbarians, the quote unquote barbarians, that were continually moving out of the steppes of Central Asia and the Caucasus, and they were moving through Russia down into Europe proper. It was a constant pressure moving tribes westward, and so had Caesar kind of blown a hole through that group of tribes that was continually moving that way, kind of just literally cut through them, through Germany and back to Gaul, peace would have been assured on the northern front for God knows how long. Certainly, the Teutoburg Forest wouldn't have happened. So many possible eventual disasters for Rome would have been averted because the precursors for them would have been eliminated. So it's entirely possible that that quote unquote Rome would stand for 1,000 years literally could have happened.
And also, it kind of speaks to who Caesar is, that they have no question about. He's definitely going to pull this shit off too. It's going to happen. We got to do something now.
We have to do it now.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point, Jessica, because the fact that they were looking at this date and they were like, oh shit, we're never going to get him. And it's not because they don't think he'll come back. It's because they think he'll come back.
He's going to come back.
Permanent dictator life status.
And they'd have zero chance to scheme because he already had a list appointing everyone at every level of government that he wanted to rule while he was gone. So those people would be powerless. So they saw that the only way to stop this would be to kill Caesar, the head, cut the head off the serpent, and we'll deal with the kind of fallout afterwards.
The chaos is better than him getting a chance to be a god.
They underestimated him. Well, not him, because obviously he died. But they underestimated, I think, the serious manipulation that would happen afterwards, right? How would, I guess, before we dive into the actual Ides of March here, getting closer to when it actually happens, how would you, to give the listener that might not know of Octavian at this point, who will be later known more historically famously as Augustus, did they have a good relationship at this point, would you say?
It's kind of unclear. We do know that the one thing we know that is that he encouraged Octavian to join not the College of Cardinals, run for Pontifex Maximus.
Yeah.
So making him a priest, because that's like a high priest of Jupiter, and that's an office. It's a lifetime appointment, and Caesar held that himself, and he used that because that gives you immense power. The role of religion in Roman society cannot be understated. It was a massive, massive presence in everyone's lives. Even though, like, to us, it seems much more mystical and ritualistic than we would think of normal religions. And you could look in hindsight, it looks very superstitious, which it was. But in the context of people who lived then, it was
wouldn't have
real
been.
for
It would have
them.
been normal. It would have been
It's like,
normal.
it'd be,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It would be completely normal and completely real. And they believed it. Like, a prophecy from a Sibyl was the word of God, but depending on who she represented, usually Jupiter, that was the word of God. So it's and people live their lives by that.
Right.
See, and one of the interesting things about when Caesar was in Spain, did he take Octavian at this time with him?
Oh, you mean on his campaign in Spain?
Yes.
I don't believe so. I don't believe so. I could be wrong. I just don't remember reading that detail.
It's just strange to me that when we know what happens eventually, right? Like, neither Antony or Octavian would have been the choice people, you know what I mean? You would have thought would succeed Caesar's legacy, in my mind at least. Like, when you know that it wasn't a particularly, it's not that, because we don't know enough details to know, I guess, the extent of what Octavian and Julius Caesar's relationship was. But we also know that Antony and him were kind of on the outs at that point. Who would have been a natural successor to Caesar if he had died earlier on?
If he had died earlier on, I mean, that's impossible to say. It depends.
Yeah.
It depends who was prominent in Rome at that time, at that moment. I know everybody feared Mark Antony, because of his popularity with the people.
In my opinion, he is simply an agent of chaos. I want the listeners to know, when Arjun says he is debauched, he is putting it extremely, extremely mildly. Because Jessica, I just see your smile right now. And
I think Mark Antony, before there is a Camus and an idea of the absurdist hero, long before that ever comes around, I think Mark Antony might be a basic personification of that very early in history. Because Kara is very right. There's not a lot of rhyme or reason to what, but I think as long as Caesar's around, there's not going to be. Because even though they're on the outs now,
Caesar, right?
they're
Like,
fixing to go. Yeah, they're fixing to go take off on a campaign, and it'll be back to business as usual. He's just not housebroken, and not somebody that you're going to drag around the streets of Rome when you're trying to be the, big swinging dick.
Take care of things.
Or leave in Rome. Yeah, you can't. What do you do with Mark Antony? He's
you apparently do not leave him in Rome to control things, because, as we know, that doesn't bode well.
And to the point of Octavian, whatever their relationship would have been, at least I think there's some relationship there that we can say. But also, I think that Octavian's just clever enough to be an opportunist. Whatever the relationship may be, the death of Caesar is what you're going to be able to seize on.
Right. Well, like, once Caesar dies, and you see Octavian operate very, very smoothly. Like, because he's from a position of weakness, he flips it over the course of a decade or two. He flips it to a position of ultimate strength, very much though using his connection to Caesar, which is why, like, their actual relationship is kind of blurry, because the things he says aren't necessarily true.
What we know is dictated by his eventual success, right? Like, he's deified his, great uncle at that point. So of course he's going to play up the relationship.
I think Octavian, whether they had a relationship or not, had the sense to paint that picture, because it very much plays to his advantage later.
And here's the interesting thing, because we already hinted about Cleopatra, but I might add that Caesar could never marry Cleopatra. No, he couldn't, because he was married to Calpurnia. And even though she was installed across the river, I mean, by all accounts, now, depending on which narrative you read, there are ideas that she had bad dreams. She was just absolutely fearful about him going to the Senate on the Ides of March. And I believe it's Plutarch that writes about that. And
Yes.
I it's Plutarch because he loves his drama. How else do I say
So
it? But
much. God, so much.
Well, see, the thing is that, well, we can get into that. There was actually right before the assassination, Caesar was, it was rumored that on the Ides of March, 15th itself, that Antony was going to propose an amendment to that law that would allow Romans of senatorial rank or higher to marry foreigners. So putting aside Calpurnia would have been no big deal because any Roman man can put aside his wife at any time. In fact, Caesar had done
That's
that with
true.
his previous wife.
what?
So,
Because the famous quote. What is the famous quote? Because it's Caesar's wife must be above suspicion, if I'm not
right,
mistaken.
above suspicion, above
reproach,
reproach.
Reproach.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. So like they could put aside. The reason Calpurnia was such a concern was until he had solidified his power in Rome, her family had massive connections. So he needed her in play. But now, I mean, if you want to see how little regard he held her in, I mean, he's keeping his mistress in royal style at a villa overlooking Rome with these massive gardens, and she's living in the Pontifex Maximus's house, which wasn't anything great. So,
That's
you know.
awkward. Cleopatra, wouldn't you be a little more concerned about what's going on in Egypt, considering you just became ruler?
The queen. Yeah.
Well, not really, because all her foes were vanquished. It's also important to note that officially she was married because she was in Rome with her brother husband as well at the same time.
That's right. That's right.
But the thing is that it's like a lot of people think that they had to consummate the marriage, but that's not true.
No, there's very little likelihood, in fact, that she would have actually, given the age when she married her first, brother, because there were two brothers actually. One that was more or less taken care of when Caesar was in Alexandria, and then the other whom she married, and then later on she would establish Caesarion. She very much played up to the fact Caesarion, son of Caesar, which was not a fun thing if you're a Roman, right? Because it's like basically saying essentially son of a king. And what in Romans do people not like? Kings.
They hate kings.
Any kind of, the concept of it is extremely repugnant, and so much further of a repugnance than, well, we can't say Americans don't like monarchy. I mean, look at what's going on right now with how we are just invested, but there's truly a disdain for the idea of someone being installed as a king in Rome, even for someone like Julius Caesar. Wasn't there, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was an example in which he said Rome will have no king. Like, it was a show. I think Antony, it was maybe during the festival of not Lupercalia, Saturnalia?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
It was
it was
Lupercalia. Yeah,
okay.
it was Lupercalia. That happened on February 15th, 44 BCE. So a month before the assassination. Good call. It was the Lupercalia, and so they did this race around the Palatine Hill. Antony, even though he was bloated and fat at the time from all his debauchery, somehow won the race. And so he ran up to Caesar and offered him a crown. And Caesar refused once, and the crowd cheered. Antony offered it again, and the crowd started to boo. And Caesar refused again, and the crowd, golf clapped, because it was becoming apparent to them that this was kind of an act. And the third time, there was no noise from the crowd. And Caesar said, he said to the crowd, Jupiter alone is the king of the Romans. And the crowd then cheered, and he had the crown taken to the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. So that was his show. And the reason they had to stage that,
that's an act.
yeah, it was total act. But the reason they had to stage that was because on the 26th of January, so just before that, there was another religious festival, and they were riding back from that. And people in the crowd, and a lot of people think that the conspirators had planted them there, right? Started yelling, "Long live the king, long live the king." And so Julius, the people the citizens who were there to cheer Julius Caesar started booing, and he said, "My name is Caesar, not the king." And the crowd kind of fell silent. They didn't applaud that. So suspicions were leaking in that he wanted to be the king. And so it's very, very, it's a very, very suspicious time. Like everyone should know that the 45 days or so leading up to the assassination is a time of great tension in Rome, because they know it can go kind of either way. Everything's
this
teetering.
isn't just like spontaneous assassination. Like there's a lot of buildup. There's a lot of political intrigue going on here.
And I think no matter what anybody says, it's also important to point out Caesar fully intended to be king, but everything, but not in name.
How do I put it?
Not in name. Everything short of being named a king, if you will. I don't know how to put that quite, but he wouldn't dick it around either.
I mean, yeah, like he was already dictator. And so like, they're like, I think he flirted with it a little bit too much. He should have never, he was as Roman as anybody, and he should have never, ever brought up that idea. And I never liked the idea that, because I hate in general how women are depicted in history, but I'm descendant of Seleucid. So that's part of like she's a Ptolemy. We're different branches, but we're all kind of, of that Macedonian kind of line. And I know they love their royalty, and they have a way of whispering, guys and girls. So I don't put it past, given the fact that Cleopatra had been there for so long, the idea of her telling him to kind of feel the crowd out is entirely possible. Because the reason I think it has to be a foreign idea is just that it's so culturally repellent to Romans. It would have taken time, and it only starts coming up around this period.
And we know, if anything, Romans are also extremely xenophobic. That's another thing. And I would add it's we cannot underestimate the power of Orientalism, right? In a negative way in this context, right?
Mm-hmm.
To many, the idea of some, especially a female, influencing Caesar at all, I am 100% sure, like you said, Arjun, that would have been in the mind of anyone in Rome at this point. Like, can you imagine if there was TMZ in Rome at this point? Like, it would have been just nonstop coverage on Cleopatra's villa.
A
no matter
foreign
what.
queen, exactly. Yeah.
The
Paps would have surrounded it.
Calpurnia? What happened to his poor Roman wife? Discarded and disgraced. Like, I could see the headline.
Then turn to page 6, and you've got Mark Antony being carried passed out, somewhere through the streets, like on a litter. Yeah, you're exactly right.
Yeah, Mark Antony woke up in whose bed?
Where?
Yeah, good question.
What was he doing? He didn't even know.
Like, his choice of wives is quite interesting to me too, because he picks like real strong women. And it's very interesting to me. Like, of all of his wives, I feel the worst for Octavia. Truly.
Oh, yeah.
The others kind of knew what they were getting in for, right? Like,
they signed up for that. Yeah.
And
we also have to remember that, like, this is a public that kind of, and nobility that, heard tales from their mothers and grandmothers of like Sulla's exploits. So it's not like a refined Roman society now. This is kind of general, like, a certain amount of debauchery was kind of expected at this point. It hadn't reached like, imperial levels, but there was a little bit of more sex. That's why I call like Sulla, he was kind of a sexual liberator that way. It kind of opened up for the men and women.
Sulla.
Yeah.
Saturnalia was a trip back in those days, y'all. Okay.
Like the idea of like just running around and like, how do I put it? It's like they were almost naked, were they not, when they were running through the streets on Lupercalia, I think?
The men were, and the women, it depended. But by that time, the Lupercalia, they sacrificed a goat and wool and dogs, I think, and they wore their pelts. And they had this race around the Palatine Hill.
That is so Mark Antony.
Past the Campus Martius. And then infertile women or women who were pregnant and wanted to have a healthy baby would stand out in the crowd and say, hit me. So like they would slap them with the pelt of this freshly killed animal, and that was considered lucky. So like you'd run by,
I don't know
no high
about
five.
you, but that seems like the opposite of lucky, depending on the type of slap, depending on who. Can you just imagine a bouncing fat Mark Antony just running through the streets, maybe setting it up so the people that are also racing just get diverted so he can finish first? Because that's what I see happening. He just
Oh yeah, he wasn't dicking
racer.
around. He was letting everybody else get in the spirit. Well, he had a whole farce with a crown to pull off later. He's got to get down to business.
I wouldn't put it past him to have a chariot parked in an alley, jump on it, and be like, "Oh yeah, I'm first."
As he's throwing nails and tacks like out of the back of it, racing. Yeah, no, that'd be him. 110%.
Well, another thing I want to point out is there are very, very important other enemies of Caesar at this time. Chiefly,
are there ever
articulate ones? And you know who I'm referencing here when I say articulate ones. I think. I know you know what I'm thinking.
Cicero?
Yes. Bingo.
Cicero, Brutus, Cassius.
Cicero.
Yeah, I would say Cicero is somebody that he was notable then, he's notable now. He's still quite written about. What do you think?
Fucking Cicero.
In a nutshell, do you think he was truly simply pro-republic, or do you think there were nuances to his feelings on Julius Caesar?
I think it was nuanced because he didn't seem to take it as quite the insult to his virtus by surrendering, because he seems the one to have adapted the most, right? And I think the reason that he was ultimately left out of the plot was that they saw him as a man who would kind of avoid conflict at any price, right? Like he did not want to be involved in anything bloody, and he also, well, it kind of makes him unique in Rome in that perspective, right? Because Virtus demanded, like for all these other conspirators, like their honor demanded that they kill Caesar for letting them surrender. There was much more complicated than that, but if you want to get to the core of it, that's what it was, right? Especially a man like Cassius.
Cicero was straight Machiavellian before it was cool to be Machiavellian. Before that was an idea, he was already on that. I think Cicero is the ultimate opportunist, man. Like you just don't get any better at it than that guy.
I agree to a large extent. I do think that he was a Republican, definitely. Mm-hmm. But I think he saw that he understood that history changed with the times, and he was willing to write out the Caesarian era to see what happened. Because remember, he was going away on the campaign. Cicero wasn't going with him. He would have been a powerful influence no matter who Caesar left in charge, because of his skill of oratory, his skill of argument. Caesar could die on campaign. Anything could happen. So I think he was a wait and let's see what happens kind of guy. Short of one thing. Had Caesar actually said, "I'm going to be king," that would have been a major problem. But beyond that, he literally accepted everything else. And I know he wasn't happy, but he accepted.
Is he the Mitt Romney?
But clever.
Of Rome?
Oh no, he's so much smarter than Mitt Romney. Who would he be?
I'm just trying to
I don't think we have. I don't think we have.
We have a Cicero.
We have anyone.
We don't have a Cicero.
No. We need a Cicero. We need a Cicero. Someone who can actually articulate things like being a constitutionalist in the modern context and things like that. Like very, very, and speak to it, aspirationally, rather than just saying, because Cicero understood that the Republic was a living entity and needed to evolve, right? Which is why he could kind of adapt to any kind of sway situation. Whereas now we don't have adaptable politicians like that.
And he's
And
not
I-
such a reactionary. It's not life or freaking death. You know,
What do you-
again, that's the point. He's going to wait and see what happens. He's got nothing but time.
What do you think about Cato the Younger? He is an interesting
well,
person.
at this time, Cato was dead, right?
Yes.
He had committed suicide in Africa. If anything, like
That's
Cato
true. He died
gave
in 46. Yeah, he died
Yeah.
in 46 BCE, if I'm not mistaken. But
yeah after the Battle of Thapsus, he killed himself in
it's just, I feel like his legacy, though,
Utica.
it's really, I feel like his legacy kind of transcends, though, like even until the assassination, if that makes sense. Because whenever I've read like Plutarch and stuff, he's one of those reoccurring figures that, like, the symbolism of his honorable death, as you would say, his suicide, which is exactly what, how to put, those dudes should have done, basically, I guess.
Right.
Like, I still think in my head, is that who the conspirators, in a way, could have thought they were honoring with "Let's all stab Caesar"?
Well, I think he could have his act could have shamed them into it. But I think like in terms of his immediate followers, I mean, Portia, Brutus's wife, was, I believe, his stepdaughter or his niece. Sorry, don't quote me on this, but she was related to Cato. So like she comes into this conspiracy as well as the one woman who was involved. And you have to think that kind of notion that, like, look at what my uncle / whatever the relation was, look at what my relation did. You have to honor it. He was willing to die for the ideals of Catonianism, which was a kind of staunch, noble,
Inflexible.
view.
Can you
Opposite
imagine
Cicero, right?
that
Opposite
nagging?
Cicero.
To come home every night? Yeah, well, you
And
didn't fall
Portia
on your
be
sword like,
You ain't
Yeah.
Cato.
You're not Cato.
She's fascinating, the way that she got herself involved in the conspiracy, because Romans at the time had a view that women could never keep secrets, right? They had this view of, like, kind of
Licentiousness,
yeah, like those really, really ultra rich people. I always refer to them kind of as Roman princesses, because that's in essence what they were. Rome didn't have a queen, but it had 1,000 princesses, right? It was kind of a gossipy clique, because that's what rich women do. I mean, we see it in every society today, right? They don't have anything else to do because every other need is taken care of. What else do you do? Gossip, spread stuff. But in order to prove that she could keep a secret, this is in February of 44 BCE. She stabbed herself in her thigh deep, then pulled the knife out, staunched the wound herself, and then bound it herself and walked around with it. It was a really deep, really painful wound. And then she showed Brutus the wound and said, "This proves that I can keep a secret, because I stabbed myself 3 days ago and I haven't said help, and I haven't cried for help, and I didn't tell you about it." So that's why she was allowed into the conspiracy.
I shot myself in the foot. Ha ha ha. You don't
Super metal.
It's
Yeah,
pretty
you don't know
hardcore,
it.
right?
You didn't know
I
it.
can't keep a secret. Look at my
Ew.
leg.
Look at my leg.
Would you want to be friends with her, though? I'm not sure. Like,
No, absolutely not. No. Too preachy.
no, I would be like, please spare me the Cato bits. Not anymore.
I know.
Please,
Let 'em go.
sweetheart, shut up.
That's what's interesting, because I argue, in a way, she's almost more interesting than Brutus himself, right? Like, to me, and not just because Shakespeare has made both Brutus and Portia kind of immortalized, and not necessarily an accurate way, as most Shakespeare. But who do you think, I guess, if there is any theme in the Shakespeare dramatization of Julius Caesar, any characters that actually hit where you would interpret them kind of close to be like from your reading? Is there anyone that lines up with the characterization?
God, it's been so long since I've read Shakespeare.
Well, I'm glad to know it's not anyone's prime piece right now, but
What do you guys think? I'm gonna because it's like I've read Julius Shakespeare twice in my life, once in high school and then once in university, and that's it. So I don't really remember.
I think
I think that it captures just little bitty tiny portions
I think
of
bits of
people's
Portia-
character, dramatic as fuck, right? Like those little things, like she's dramatic. We know that. Like, come on, she's stabbing herself in the leg, whatever. That kind of comes through.
I do.
But
I know. I would argue Portia's influence. Yeah, that's a theme in it that I was surprised to know was actually, you know what I mean? Not based on correct, like anything incorrect. She was dramatic. She participated.
yeah,
She
Well, okay,
encouraged.
so it's also important to know that like we like I just said it's gossip, but there was also it was a tremendous kind of intelligence network as to where the nobility was. Having a wife like famously Marius had Julia Maria, who worked the ladies of Rome for all they were worth, developing her own like network within that and her own intelligence. She knew what was going on in every household. So if Portia, and we don't know exactly how much she was involved beyond the fact that Brutus did confide in her.
But she could keep a secret, right? Would she have bragged about her?
Well, let's put it this way: if she had bragged about the conspiracy, it wouldn't have happened. They would all be dead, right? Unless I don't know, maybe Calpurnia didn't want to let Caesar know. Who knows?
That's a thought.
But like this is complete conjecture. But at the same time, Calpurnia, by all account, lived Roman, like the women's version of Virtus, which means that you protect your family interests,
Very
even if you
honorable.
even if you hate your husband, it doesn't matter. You protect your family interests.
and
So-
yeah, he's banging his mistress set up over on the hill, but she's got far from a hard life. Also, like, what does she really have to bitch about? She's the wife of Caesar.
Yeah, there's a lot going. I mean, that's a kind of complex relationship because she never ever in any account badgered Caesar about that. She just kind of went with the flow. So like
Which
there's
can I
theory-
just say, I
there's
think
kind of
that's even
theories.
better. Just not acknowledging it, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think that's even more badass, right? Just saying, okay, what are you
Complete
talking about? You know what
blind
I mean?
eye.
Just,
Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's even more badass, honestly, because like, I hope this isn't happening, but if my dude were banging a different chick, I would not blame the other chick. First off, that's such a kind of shitty thing because it takes two to tango, right? I would
Exactly.
just be like, well, I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do. He's gonna do what he wants to do. Done with him.
I'm gonna eat my
not gonna
grapes,
bother
get
her.
fanned all day, and if somebody stabs him in the back, no skin off mine. Yeah.
But who would you? Okay, so now that we're getting the idea of what's going on, the political intrigue, who besides Brutus, Portia, and who would you like to tell the listeners about? Who do you think is interesting of the conspirators beyond who we've discussed?
I think Cassius is probably the most. He was the driving force behind it. He was Brutus's brother-in-law, and the two hadn't got along. Like they never got along until they
That's
had,
wild.
until they had this dinner, and
Should Portia poison him? No, just kidding.
she probably should have, but okay. This is on the evening of the 22nd of February. Brutus and Cassius meet at a dinner party, and for a family dinner party, right? And afterwards, Cassius told Brutus that on March 1st, the Senate would vote to make Caesar king. Okay, we don't know if that's true or not, but we know that he told Brutus that. And in the days following this and the weeks following this, Rome had kind of been completely covered in graffiti and pamphlets saying that words like "if only Brutus were alive" or "oh, that Brutus were alive." And this refers to Brutus's ultimate ancestor who kicked out Tarquinius Superbus, the last king of Rome. So he kicked him out of the city into exile. So they were saying that we need a Brutus to accomplish this again. That was it was the family name meant a lot in Rome, so much so that like to defeat Carthage, they needed another Scipio. You know what I mean? Like they would bring in a family name to do that. So the idea, it would give so much weight to the cause if Brutus was with the conspirators because of his family history.
As if he
Right.
didn't have Portia pressuring him. My God. And then he has all this stuff like, we need Brutus. We
And
need Brutus. Oh
there,
no.
yeah, and there's a good theory, many good theories that Cassius was behind all of that graffiti.
I was gonna say
Yeah.
I thoroughly believe that. That's just my
That
personal
sounds
belief
super
that.
antagonistic. Like if you have a negative relationship with your brother-in-law, that
And
sounds like some trolling. Next
But
level
and
trolling.
Argent's right. You need the name, and to have all your agents of chaos go out and do this, it plays on his hubris a little bit, and plays on everything that Brutus has going on internally. Like,
and
oh, it's perfect.
it corners him in a way, you know, because he has to live up to his name, but he's torn between his loyalty to Caesar. Maybe we should go a little bit into Brutus after this, but
Mhm.
it's important to note that that day, February 22nd, the same day of the dinner party, the talk of all of Rome was this rumor that had been spread. And I'm pointing my finger at Cassius because it's just the timing is just too good. So there was a set of prophecies called the Sibylline books. Now, a Sibyl is an oracle, the way like, you know, the Oracle of Delphi of Greece, the Romans called them Sibyls. And these books were written for the kings, the original kings of Rome, that and apparently they told the prophecies of everything that would happen in the entire history of the Republic, right? And the prophecy that the rumor that was going around that day, although like it shouldn't have been available to the public, and it wasn't. So someone said that in the Sibylline books, it was written that the Parthians would never be defeated except by a king. So then people all over the city, the talk of the entire city, that was that Caesar would have to make himself king before the 18th when he was supposed to
no.
leave,
Mhm.
in order to defeat the Parthians. So people were talking, tension is rising. Then this conveniently, these brothers-in-law who don't get along have
Just
a dinner
magically are.
party and enter Portia for arranging it. Do you know what I mean? So like
Yeah.
there are a lot of factors at work here because Caesar has enemies. You know, he does. And Brutus is being forced into honoring his kind of hereditary obligation because Brutus under Caesar was prospering. He paid zero price for serving under Pompey. In fact, he
I
was
wonder why.
he was on the list to be consul in the next couple of years, like fast track to the consulship. And there's a rumor that the reason for this is because Caesar and Brutus's mother were lovers.
Which that was
And
true. That part was true.
it was true, and they started their love affair when Caesar was 15. So he could literally be Brutus's father.
Mhm.
And when we get to Caesar's last words, it kind of comes full circle.
Alleged,
Yeah.
That would isn't that wild though? Like, I mean, I would be pissy if I were Brutus, right? Like that's some, how to put it, daddy drama. Like even if it wasn't his dad, like he's gonna be very aware of those rumors. Like that's gonna have been floating around Rome, right? You
Yeah.
think?
I know it wasn't encouraged like by the nobility, but I'm sure it was around. People like to gossip, you know. We like to gossip. I'm sure it was around.
Right.
But,
It's
but
more of a during the day behind closed doors. And oh yeah, I can see that.
right? But the thing is, like Caesarion looked like Caesar by all accounts, and he walked like Caesar. Like he had Caesar's gait. Whereas Brutus is kind of the polar opposite of Caesar, you know, kind of like a nerdy, I mean,
Ugh.
skinny, nerdy guy. Like, you know, he's
Like-
not.
I hate to say it, but just so all of our listeners know, I'm very clearly on the side of Daddy Caesar at this point. Like always have been, always will be. He's one of my history daddies. But yeah, no, that's also, it's just a further layer to everything if you consider that. I'm glad you brought that up.
And so, okay, so just so you guys know, it was at that dinner party, their discussion afterwards, where they both agreed that they would begin to feel out senators, and that's where the conspiracy to kill Caesar was born on February 22nd, 44 BCE.
What a dinner party. What a dinner party, guys.
And in that discussion, that's literally where they decided to leave out Cicero. Because they figured that he was not a man who was prepared to die for the Republic. And they knew that this was going to get violent.
Yeah. And I don't think they were wrong either to do that. Personally.
Agreed. I don't think
there's, no, I wouldn't have told him. Would you have? I wouldn't have.
Well, also, there's one thing to note, too, that he had an ability he was extremely articulate. Like, he had the ability to sway people with his words. So if they included him in the conspiracy and say they brought in everyone who they eventually brought in, which was about 60 senators, he would have had the ability to pull the plug because he could talk people out of it. Mm-hmm. Right? More than he would have actually betrayed them to Caesar, because I don't think he would have. I think he knew. Yeah. He knew where his bread was buttered.
He did. He did.
I love that expression.
An opportunist all the way.
So, okay, should we just another broad point. Caesar had expanded the Senate. So, like, the reason that there was a lot more discontent was that Caesar had expanded the Senate to 900. So much so that his new senators outnumbered the old nobles.
Oh no!
And in Rome, the Senate was like the ultimate status symbol, right? So not only did he dilute it, he filled those with provincials and Gauls. They hated him for that. Remember, Gaul had just been conquered. They were still considered barbarians by the Romans. And even though these Gauls that joined the Senate were from Cisalpine Gaul, an area that had been part of Rome for over 100 years, they still considered them barbarians. And he even promoted a centurion that had served him loyally to the Senate, so that it didn't matter if he just so that if he was dictator or not, everything would go his way. The Senate had very little power. So that's why, like, Rome was kind of ripe to flip enough senators to make this conspiracy happen.
I think you're exactly right. It's a flip enough to make it happen, but also on the face of it, I see what Caesar is trying to do as well, which is quite clever. Again, but for timing here, overall would have been probably a fairly advantageous move for him.
Absolutely. So we can fast forward to March 1st. That's the day that Cassius had told Brutus that was the day that he would be made king. But instead, what happened was that the Senate voted to make him dictator for life.
Oh no!
And all senators in the coming weeks before he left, they voted that they would have to take an oath of loyalty on Jupiter Optimus Maximus to be loyal to Caesar forever. And to them, they considered that as good as being king. Dictator for life, which means dictator for life. And they had to swear a holy oath never to oppose his will, which means they would have lost all voice in the Republic. So as that Senate meeting was breaking up, famously, Caesar saw a lot of people were talking and conversing as they left out, as you can imagine, because they now have a dictator for life. And he noticed Brutus and Cassius talking. And Caesar said to an associate, what do you think of this Cassius? I don't like the way he looks. He looks very pale. So Caesar had an inkling, I think, that, maybe something was going on.
I just can't picture him being that oblivious. Even with his ego, so to speak, stroked pretty regularly now. I can't picture some of these conspirators being that suave, if that makes sense. Like, I just can't.
It's a really, really like high risk time, because Caesar had, remember, like, I mean, we've seen the rise of kind of authoritarian tendencies in the last couple of years all across the world. If you see the way that the ultra supporters of these people, it's like a godlike kind of reverence of them. That was on full-blown display. We're talking like at least 60% of the Senate was completely behind Caesar, and so they'd report anything. So this group had to be kept very tight, and it's kind of amazing that the secret was kept for so long.
That is, yeah. I'm wondering, to you, what do you think is, do you think that they had, how many first off, to our listeners that may have only vague familiarity with the expression the Ides of March, right? And a vague conception of conspirators. How many conspirators do we believe now historically to be involved with the actual assassination?
Okay, in the end, they had 60 conspirators, and it's kind of debated as the actual number of people who attacked him, but it was somewhere between 8 and 12.
So do you think some people actually chickened out when
the act actually happened? I believe so, because it didn't happen organically. Like it wasn't, I'm sorry, it happened organically. It didn't happen like a well executed plan, even though it was the plan. Like, it took time. It's kind of a miracle that it worked, really, all things considered.
So after March 1st, what is happening in the lead up to the 15th? I mean, you've already hinted at what we believed was going to happen on March 18th, right? Like
Right.
The idea of him going off to Parthia and
so the plan kind of goes into overdrive. Brutus hits the baths, and he hits the baths hard. Like he is listening to conversations, listening for any senatorial person that had any kind of discontent, and he's feeling them out expertly. If you think about it, it's kind of like, this is kind of genius level, because he has to find people who be loyal to the cause very, very quickly, and he does. So and he has to question those, because a lot of people turned him down and never reported him for seditious activities. He questions them expertly, just looking for enough discontent that maybe, just maybe, they can be brought in. And the thing is that, like, I believe he brought in somewhere around 6 or 7 people, and he had them do the same. So like, everyone who was brought into the conspiracy would be tasked with bringing in more people into the conspiracy, because if you think about it, like-minded people move with like-minded people. So but everyone in it knew that it was all or nothing, because if they failed, they died. If proof was found of this conspiracy, then they'd all be dead. So it was a really, really a tense time. And not soon after that, on the 7th of March, Brutus discovers that Cassius had spread his name around Rome as the leader, exposing him so that he could not back out. Like, Brutus was in extreme danger. So like, while Cassius was filling out people, he told people that, like, Brutus isn't so happy with Caesar either. And I think that kind of gives credence to the idea that the notion that he was Caesar's son was around, because that would kind of explain why he felt comfortable doing that, because he knew Caesar would never actually, kill his own son. And contrary, like the flip side of that coin is that Brutus would never betray his own family, because it would mean robbing his sister of a husband. So he kind of bonded Brutus to him. So that's why I said, like, Cassius is kind of the center of this conspiracy.
Where do you think Cassius's big bone to pick with Caesar is, given that we at this point think is it beyond virtuous? Is it beyond clemency?
It is. I think he was appointed. Sorry, I don't have that in my notes, but he was supposed to get a very, very high office, probably consul, but don't quote me. It might be praetor. He was left out of the mix, and that is supposedly where, like, the bone of contention came out, because he was a staunch Pompeian, and that may well remember when Caesar decided to grant clemency. He granted clemency to a lot of people. That's what I mean. Like, he didn't fully learn the lessons from Marius and Sylla, because he needed to do a little bit of prescribing, right? Because he left some dangerous pieces on the board. Not that I condone dictatorship, but we all love Julius Caesar here, don't we?
I think
Secretly.
we do, yeah.
Not secretly.
Secretly.
Oh, not secretly. No, I'm not secret about it at all.
So crucially, they brought in on that same day, the 7th. They brought in one of Caesar's, someone that was, like, above reproach for Julius Caesar, a guy named Decimus Brutus, a distant cousin of Brutus. He was one of Caesar's generals, enforcers, and he was brought into the conspiracy. And with him, someone so close to Caesar, they began to actually plan the actual act. And so there was a various kind of ideas thrown about: an attack by gladiators, an ambush where they would separate Caesar from his lictors and throw him off a bridge, and then the assassins would be waiting at the bottom of the bridge to kill him. But the thing is, they decided it had to be a public spectacle, because in their eyes it was a legal act. They were killing a tyrant, and in Roman law, if you kill a tyrant, it's illegal. And the meeting, they also learned that day that the next meeting of the Senate, and the last before he departed Rome, would be on the Ides of March, March 15th. On the 9th, I'll keep going. On the 9th, that's when Portia shows him her impressive leg wound and says she wants in. And
that one, she's a piece of work, man.
And
she's
she
also
does,
like, wants the glory. Honestly, she wants some glory.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Kara.
And this is to what both of you were talking about earlier, vis-a-vis Mark Antony. On the 9th, the conspirators meet. This is kind of the final list. The 60 conspirators meet, and they bring up killing Mark Antony. First they bring up, I should correct myself. First, they bring up bringing him into the conspiracy because he was out of favor of Caesar. That was poo-pooed. And then they say they have to kill him because they do not want, number one, they were all terrified of him. But the thing is, Mark Antony was Caesar's co-consul that year. So Brutus is the one who shoots this down, and he says, look, a tyrannicide is legal, but if we kill a consul of Rome, we become criminals. So whatever happens afterwards, we kill the consul of Rome, so we're all going to be put to death for it. So that's when they come up with the plan to separate Caesar and Antony, because in any normal Senate procedure, Caesar would be sitting on his throne, and Mark Antony would be sitting not far behind him. And no one, even though he was kind of, Pillsbury doughboy at this time, no one wanted anything to do with him because he was a crazy, crazy bastard
Exactly.
who loved killing people.
I wouldn't want to jump on him if he was fat as Henry VIII. Like, I'm not taking that fucking chance because it is Mark Antony.
And then we go to the 14th. So we're very close now. All right.
Right before.
Right before. And this is where the rumor comes up, and it was actually a plan that the next day, the last day of the Senate before he goes out, Caesar goes on campaign with Cleopatra. By the way, Cleopatra was planning on going on campaign with him. That on the 15th, Mark Antony would not only recognize Caesarion as Caesar's son officially, but the law that banned Romans from marrying foreigners would be lifted. So if anyone in that conspiratorial crew needed any more reason to go through with it and not pull out, it was kind of given to them that day, because what they were not only now dealing with a dictator for life, they were dealing with a dictator for life with an heir whose blood was so royal that he could literally make himself king of Rome, because he would have the allegiance of the entire Greek world. Like half the Mediterranean world would follow him if he was king of Rome. He would have a real problem on their hands with Caesarion, which meant monarchy was inevitable, right? And that evening, Caesar has dinner with 3 people, including Decimus Brutus, his loyalist, who went over to their side. And they have a very uncomfortable discussion about the best way to die. You can just imagine Decimus Brutus sitting there and being like,
Good God. That's awkward.
And Caesar says quickly and unexpectedly. So, I mean, he kind of got his wish.
I wouldn't argue quickly, considering
certainly
how many
unexpectedly.
Yeah. Well, ironically, they've clocked it. The latest thought is that entire, from the first wound to his death, was 1 minute. 1 minute.
Oh, okay.
It happened quick.
Time for like a blood clot.
I mean, I can imagine that that would have been the longest minute of anybody's life, but it was a minute.
You've got that many wounds. You've got to nail an artery at some point. You would think it shouldn't take too terribly long.
I forget it's like 45, like with a guillotine, right? Like even when the head's dismembered, like there's still like a consciousness, like, and there's still like motor movement in the head for like a solid 30 to 45 seconds after.
I think so I'm like, it's like 30 seconds. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I'll take Caesar's maybe of the two.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, it's a hell of a way to go, but it was it's better than being tortured to death.
Honestly,
all day, every day.
It's dramatic.
Dying of your wounds on a battlefield or something horrific like that. So yeah, I guess so.
So the king of all awkward dinner conversations also have it happen. So this was like a momentous time. And you know what I love these details, because this is what makes history fun, right? It gets overlooked, but come on. Imagine you're gonna kill the guy and you're sitting there at the dinner table and he's like, "What do you think the best way to die is?" And he's staring at you and you're like, "Oh shit, does this mofo know?"
Right.
Is he right? Is he okay with this? Now, and this has been kind of debated by historians, but is there a consensus if he actually had epilepsy?
I believe that there is, yeah. I mean,
because it was seen symbolic, right? Because allegedly Alexander had epilepsy, allegedly. So there's like this. That's what's always put the cynic in me, right? Like the symbolism of it is pretty. How do I put it? Convenient. Like, I'm not saying by any means it'd be convenient to have epilepsy, but especially with his position and having been a general for many years. But it could be seen symbolically as another link between him and other generals of repute, shall we
Yeah.
say.
Let's put it that way. No, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Interesting.
I feel like historians like to draw parallels with Caesar and Alexander, and I understand why, but at the same time it puts the cynic in me, right? Like, I don't know.
I think there's enough evidence to say that and he was an epileptic, just because, like, at least initially, I don't know about late in life, but at least initially there was a good effort on his part to kind of conceal that.
Yeah. If it's not that, it's something, or it's something sort of akin to it.
Because possibly. I think, yeah, and I think like religious zealots at the time still kind of viewed it as a curse, right? You were cursed by the gods with that condition.
Yeah.
So yeah, I honestly, I don't think we'll ever know Kara for sure, one way or the other. But
no, we won't.
Yeah.
Unless some random source comes out of the woodwork that hasn't been discovered.
Yeah. Which, hey, possible. Not likely.
Hope,
not likely, so. But possible.
I hope so. I hope they find a treasure trove with like Sola's writings and like all that kind of stuff. Like, we're missing so much.
Like next week, something be found like, God,
I would love that.
To be written by Caesar. What?
I'll retire. I'll retire if that's the case. But because I'll just have too much to read.
He wrote a lot. I mean, we have a lot of surviving stuff from Julius Caesar. I mean, he is nothing if not a propagandist. He knows 100% the importance of documenting his adventures.
Well, that's part of his genius, isn't it? Yeah.
I tried. I was such a Caesar fanboy when I was younger that, like, I'm talking like my early teens, that I tried talking in the third person, like he writes in the third person.
Yeah.
Didn't work. Yeah. It didn't go over well. Arjun went to the store today, and Arjun was trying it on a pair of pants. It didn't work. Nope.
It's all right. As a kid, I used to speak like I was a pope and say in the we instead of I. We do this, It's all right. I think Arjun's is much cooler. I mean, mine's a lot more lame. If I could have just pulled the Caesar, that would have been awesome. But yeah.
No, apparently only one person can pull the Caesar.
And you have to literally be Caesar. So.
Although I would argue if there was a runner-up, Augustus certainly lived up to the hype in a way.
Augustus lived up to the hype.
However, every subsequent one was a disappointment.
And then we take a real big downhill trip from there. I mean, there are a few bright spots once you get to Claudius, but mostly just a fucking downhill venture for Rome after that.
I'm just still picturing the dinner party, by the way. Just like you and a few bros, just a couple conspirators, just staring at Caesar as he's like.
That would have shaken. That would have shaken me to the core, though.
Out, dude.
Yeah, I would have been like, "Nope, I am out. Fuck you guys, I'm out."
Right, the dictator for life. This genius military commander, genius politician, is staring at you in the eyes and saying, "What is the best way to die?" Like, I don't know how you don't kind of shit your pants in that situation.
How are you not thinking, oh my God, am I about to sentence myself to whatever my death's going to be? Like, I better think about this. Maybe, I don't know. No, I would have chickened out so fast and so hard.
Like, imagine what's going through your mind. I'm like, oh my God, this guy has given me lots of wine and he's trying to break me.
Yeah.
I'll be sweating. I'd be sweating. But now we come to the Ides of March. So, do you guys have any questions about like the theories or what's going on that day? Do you guys have anything before I get to like the accounts?
No, I want to hear.
I want to hear the accounts.
Okay, so what we know is that like around 5 a.m. that day, there was a sudden wind that came across the Tiber, and Caesar, sleeping in the bed of his wife for a change.
Oh wow! Shocking.
The windows and the door blew open, and he woke up and he saw Calpurnia. He shot up in bed and he saw Calpurnia next to him, but she was in like a very, very troubled dream. Okay. That's like, I'm just going to give you the facts. You guys know the extra stuff that Calpurnia eventually warned him. That's kind of disputed, like not to go out that day. But there was that gust of wind because that was reported elsewhere. It's a kind of weird thing that happened that day. Now, the Senate traditionally met at the break of dawn. So like when the sun was fully in the sky. So they made, there was a final gathering that day of the 60 senators among a group of 100, first thing in the morning, probably some around 5:30 at Cassius's villa. He used the excuse of his son's toga virilis ceremony, his manhood, coming to manhood. And so they all kind of confirmed that, okay, today is the day. We're all going to act. We're all going to do this. Then they made their way over. At this time, the Senate building itself was being rebuilt because of the civil strife and what happened with Marius and Sulla. And subsequently, the building had been battered several times, and now it was in a state of repair. So as a result, when the Senate met, it always kind of met in different places. This time, it met at the Theater of Pompey, kind of ironically. This was right next to the field of Mars. And so the senators made their way there. And as some of them walked in, they would have seen what they were calling Caesar's throne. This was a gold, bejeweled, and it was done with gold and carved out of ivory. And the armrests were two gigantic elephant tusks, rumored to be the tusks of one of Pyrrhus's elephants. Just a fun kind of historical fact. So like when Caesar arrived, a lot of the conspirators and a lot of the senators were still standing outside. And this is when a man named Trebonius went and pulled aside Mark Antony, separating him from Caesar. Probably offering him, telling him about some orgy or some really, really cool thing that was going to happen later. But, you know, if it's Mark Antony, it's either about money or it's about women. So something along those lines. And it had to be good to keep him outside, right? Because Antony was, I don't know what this man told him, but it had to be so depraved to keep Mark Antony fixated outside the Senate for that long. So Caesar took his seat, and the way that it was laid out like any kind of Roman theater, like if you picture a Roman amphitheater, kind of a more miniature version of that, because this was a theater where like mimes and actors and plays, and famously a comedian performed there. Yes, they had comedians in ancient Rome. So a much kind of smaller version of an amphitheater. And as Caesar took his seat, the Senate sat down. All the senators that were there. It's important to note that this wasn't the full 900. There were perhaps around 300 people there of mixed loyalty. So there were. So if you think about it, in that context, 60 is kind of a lot of people in a group of like 300. A bunch of them, it's debated between 8 and 12. Surrounded Caesar's throne while Caesar was sitting. The first wound that was cast at him was cast from behind. It missed, and Caesar got up from his seat. And the next thing that was done was they pulled his toga. This was the signal that the attack was going to go ahead. They pulled his toga off his shoulder, and basically what happened was the attack occurred. Famously, Cassius slashed him across the face. Brutus stabbed him in the groin. Which, again, you kind of think about it.
He has some daddy issues. He has
exactly.
some serious, like.
So the idea was that he fell to the ground, and that's when he was bleeding out, but he was not dead. And everyone there, the conspirators, was forced to go stab him because then they had his blood on his hands. They were in. So he suffered 23 wounds, and only 5 of them were major. And Caesar saved his honor by covering his face with his toga before he died. That was a Virtus thing. And famously, he died directly under the statue of Pompey. It's kind of a poetic death, all in all. And yeah, that was the momentous Ides of March, everyone.
So, what are the lessons learned from the Ides of March? Eliminate
Vanquish your enemies.
Yeah. That's not the time to be judicious or particularly giving. Get rid of them. Purge.
Purge your friends. Okay, hold on. We're not condoning violence. But what we are condoning is...
I am if you're a dictator.
Okay, yes. But if there is toxicity in your life, don't keep it around. You know? Don't just like expect it to be like fine and have your little, I'm sorry, it's not you, it's me kind of shit. No, eliminate that, because you know they're going to create a problem for you later on. People fester. Anybody that's negative is just going to continue being negative. That being said, what's interesting to me, and what I do not think happened, what happens after he's dead? I think what's actually interesting, even beyond, like, how do I put it, him being stabbed so many times, is like how the momentum changes, because the theory was that, and the hope from the conspirators was that people would perceive it as the assassination of a dictator, as a tyrant. How does this go downhill?
Woo!
Well, it goes downhill because they had mistaken the fact that the people were annoyed at Caesar's, leaning into the idea of him becoming a king, but they had not stopped loving him. They still loved Julius Caesar. Caesar he wasn't a man of the people, but he had done a lot to improve their condition, especially when you consider the fact that the nobles' status quo was to do nothing for the people. Yeah. So he still had the love of their people, and they gladly transferred that to anybody but the conspirators.
Yeah.
I think they kind of portrayed it very well in HBO's Rome. For a few hours afterwards, maybe even a few days afterwards, until the funeral, the conspirators were probably feeling themselves pretty hard, making plans, thinking everything was going to go their way. And then kind of history kind of agrees that when Antony gave his speech, if I'm remembering correctly, sorry, I stopped my research here, but if I'm remembering correctly, Antony's speech set the crowd ablaze, and he had them from then on.
I think it was honestly debauched in a relatable way somehow, with a little shred of dignity.
I think it had that, but then I also think that Antony knows a lot of his power stems from Caesar. So not only it's less about, they fucked up. They fucked up, because I think you've got to kill Antony. You've got to get rid of a lot of people if you're going to take Caesar, So I think, it's very interesting the way it goes. And I think that's a very important point that you make there, Arjun, that it's important to note they weren't happy with all the king talk, but they certainly had not fallen out of love with Caesar, not by any stretch of the imagination.
Right. There's a massive difference between disagreeing with a politician and completely hating them, right? Like, I'm sure we all have politicians that we still like, even though we disagree with 9/10 of what they do. I think that was very much the flavor there, but much more intense. Like, they had an intense love for Caesar, and Kara alluded to it. He had been giving, news from the front, propaganda, if you will, for Gaul. Like, this has been going on for 20 years. Like, they had this image of Caesar, and then he lived up to that image. So at least for a long time. And
it's important to note, like, how little of a how little trickle from the top the common people tended to get. And like it or not, even if the things that he did for the plebs and the populace seemed small, they were concessions that these folk hadn't really gotten before. So it's important to remember, like, I think sometimes it's underestimated just how much the people loved Caesar.
That's why I think the lesson of Caesar is, in addition to vanquishing your foe, don't overplay your hand.
Yeah.
I'll never forget the culture that you live in, because I truly believe that he could have just instead of making himself dictator for life, every year have his consuls keep declaring him dictator every single year, and the people would have ate it up as long as he was winning in the field, you know. But I think I hate to say it this way, but with Cleopatra's influence, I truly think that he thought that eventually a monarchy would have to be established, and his vehicle for that would be the Parthian campaign.
No, I agree with that 100%. I mean, it's no coincidence he's going to go and he's going to do this. I think it was definitely on purpose. I think all the moves he was making were very deliberate. But I think you're right. Like, don't overplay your hand, and certainly don't overplay it too quickly.
Definitely, it's yeah. He didn't learn. I don't know how you do a gentle prescription, but that's what he needed to do. He forgave too many people. Some people he could not have been brought back into the fold. He should have understood that. But I mean, this is all historical hindsight, and at the same time, I think in Caesar's heart of hearts, when he justified crossing the Rubicon, he said that he was saving the Republic. I think he convinced himself that that's what he was doing, and that he was not trying to make him, at least at that moment and that time.
I truly think he thought in that moment that's
He
exactly
believed
what
it.
he was doing. 100%. He believed his own, I guess, thing, right? Like, it may have been propaganda, but I think he actually fell into his own propaganda, like you said.
And then on the reverse, that's some of, I think, why he was so very successful. He believed it. It's not just I'm taking this stance because he believed it. He believed it so hard for so long. It's also part of kind of what makes him successful. Feeding yourself your own bullshit, if you will.
Well, yeah, and also, like, I mean, he knew that if he won, he'd write his version of history would have panned out. And I don't think the war with Pompey could have gone either way, but Caesar had many advantages at that point. Like, he had the battle-hardened army, he had a lot going for him, and he had nothing to lose, and his men had nothing to lose because he made them rebels. When you have an army that is that motivated, and then you have an army with an option to run away or surrender gladly and be welcomed, the cards kind of start swinging your direction kind of quickly.
That's exactly right. And again, his men war for how long? Like, yeah, you're right. That's an excellent point. Yeah, definitely.
And he was a commander that led by example. I always feel like he was willing to do what he would have his troops do. And from a leadership point of view, there's a really good book I would advise folks to read called Masters of Command. And I believe it is by Barry. Hold on, I have this book somewhere behind me.
Barry Strauss?
Strauss,
yeah.
Yes. And it's excellent. And I think it's a really good examination of, three very brilliant commanders and what makes them good, what makes them unique. And it evaluates the good, the bad, the ugly. Plus, I like Barry Strauss's work anyway. But the takeaway to me about Caesar is, like, one of the things that sticks out is when he was in Egypt, like during the Egyptian campaign, he actually freaking jumped into the Nile River with like full armor on. Mind you, he was in his 50s at this point. This this guy that's been on campaign for decades just jumps in full in the Nile, right? Like, can you imagine? He didn't have that many troops comparatively with him in the Egyptian campaign. Like, he inspired feats of valor wherever he was. His tactics, his ability to master logistics is truly something that makes him unique too, because that's something even the best of leaders can fail to grasp.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking Gallipoli.
Yeah, no, just because you're a great strategist, it does not a field commander make. And that is what is interesting about Caesar, is he's both very much a strategist and very much a campaign leader in the fields. He can strategize, and then he can go out and do it himself like a
And I
boss.
might add, like, the promise of Roman citizenship was a huge, big
Ooh,
thing.
yeah.
That was one of the huge driving factors for, number one, why a lot of Romans hated, like, let's put it as it is. Many patricians hated him
Yep.
flatly. Was the idea that, similar to how he was increasing the Senate size, right, to 900, he was also expanding opportunities for there to be a path to citizenship.
Yep.
And I might add, just as there is today, there's a lot of backlash with that, right? Like, providing a path to citizenship. Now, and here's what the problem is too. You have this xenophobia of non-Romans, and even, oddly enough, even to cultures that regionally aren't that far, like mileage-wise, that aren't too
Right.
far out from the Italian peninsula, I might add. And especially with Gaul being so recent, the idea that, so, people that were on campaign that were not necessarily, how do I put it, Roman by blood, in the sense of a Roman citizen, could be promised money, could be promised potentially land. That's always in Rome. That's an incendiary thing. Anytime you propose land and money handouts
and citizen,
oh,
yeah. Oh dear.
Like, certain things still are not in favor with.
Oh, you mean xenophobia and the 1% growing larger instead of smaller?
God,
imagine
I can't
that.
see any 21st century parallels. My God.
Mm-mm.
I mean,
there's a lot.
Yeah, I know.
There's a lot. Like, it's important to remember that, like, as much as we kind of, like, I mean, there's a lot to admire about Caesar, but he was a product of his time, and the Republic was utterly corrupt, right? Everyone was corrupt. And Julius Caesar had, I mean, by the time he'd conquered Gaul, he had enough money to pay off his moneylenders. But the reason he stayed in Gaul for so long was in part because he needed to raise that money, because he owed so much money, because he had to pay so many bribes, and he had a lavish lifestyle to get the command to begin with, to, like, first to get to the triumvirate level, and then to eventually get his command in Gaul. And it's the Republic was a complete mess, and I truly think that Caesar was inevitable because of what my new series is about. Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla Felix. Those two men doomed the Republic to fall to the Empire.
Oh yeah, it was already it was just going to be a matter of who, what, but it was going to be soon, and we were already on that path. It's just, yeah, I think you're exactly right there. Whew. Yes, that's an excellent point, Arjun. Which, again, go listen to that, everybody. If you're jumping into this kind of at how Arjun started out going, wait a minute, what's happening? What's going on? Go listen to that series and then listen to this. And it's going to make all the sense in the world. You're going to be in it. You're going to understand kind of what Arjun's moved through tonight if you're not exactly familiar with it. So I think that's an excellent, just like, go listen to that maybe first.
It sums up everything. You'll get to see the rise of Gaius Marius, and you'll get to see Sulla being debauched in the best way possible. And understand
on that one, actually.
Yeah, understand that, like he. That's one of his, like, because he's always portrayed as a villain, and I truly believe this. Like, it's possible to admire the boy yet hate the man he became. And it's like, Sulla's youth is like
I can get behind it.
Rise,
that's exactly
right?
it.
Like,
I can get behind it.
And like he was a sexual liberator, and like you never really get that in history a lot. So like it's a kind of cool experience. So everyone check it out. The series is called Versus. The first episode is the Eagles of Jupiter.
It's one of his best too. So seriously, if you're gonna start with it, I mean that's a good
I just think it's a good prep before, because everybody's gonna have probably seen Rome, and nobody listening to this doesn't know who the hell Julius Caesar is. But how we get there and where's some of the inspiration, everybody knows about Caesar. Not everybody knows about that necessarily. And I think it's a good foundation to build on before you listen to this, to get the ideas of where the Republic was at this point.
Absolutely. And like once I promise you this, that after you listen to those episodes and like, you know, when the series is finally over, I should give a warning. Like the first episode is 2.5 hours long. It's like a movie. Trust me, guys, listen to it. But after you listen to that and do your Rome rewatch, you will see things in the TV show Rome, and you'll pick up on it because like they mention Marius and Sulla so much more than you think. And it's right there. Like you'll see things. Yeah.
Yeah, they do. You guys know I hate historical drama. I hate most of them. Rome is not a bad series. Rome's actually pretty freaking good.
They make Antony pretty sexy. I will say that. Unfortunately,
much more handsome than he was.
James Purefoy is delicious. Okay,
who are y'all's favorite depictions of Caesar and Antony? Because I'm sitting here thinking like Rex Harrison Caesar, okay? Like I have to admit, like I'm thinking that's one of my I have a lot of issues with Elizabeth Taylor's Cleopatra. However, the Richard Burton and the Rex Harrison are not the issue. Like,
yeah, it was good. Definitely.
Like Richard Burton to me, like his later years are exactly what I picture in a 20th century situation what Mark Antony could have possibly became, except perhaps more articulate. How about that? Because I'm not going to do the disservice of saying Burton wasn't actually a good and clever orator and writer. Burton was, but he would have certainly been as debauched and certainly as drunk. And maybe that's what makes his depiction of Antony so great, is he was probably very little acting.
I think so. It came naturally.
I think 110%. If there's anybody that's a born Antony.
One of the peculiar, there's a TV series on Cleopatra. I think it was Timothy Dalton and then Billy Zane. Billy Zane was the strangest version of Antony I will ever.
Timothy Dalton as Caesar?
Yes.
I don't remember this.
No, it was like made for TV shit, okay? Like, but I was all about it.
No, Billy Zane. That always bugs me because I always get, ever since I shaved my head, everyone says I look like Billy Zane and I don't see it and it always annoys me.
Not at all. Not at all.
I was right. It is Timothy Dalton. Okay, so cool. I remembered. I just can't get over like freaking Billy Zane as Caesar. Like, not Caesar, as Antony. Now, Billy Zane as Caesar, I'd be not believing. But Timothy Dalton as Caesar is good. But, oh, yes. And for anyone interested in seeing how that is, it came out in 1999.
Where does it stream?
Yeah, I'm going to watch that.
I have to not lie. I think I got like a DVD copy at like the library because I remember like an old school finding it out, not just like, it says Pluto TV free though. It says it's actually available for streaming free on Pluto TV, which is actually Yep. So y'all.
Oh, I might watch that after this.
I was just saying, I know what I'm doing.
Can I just say I like the casting of Cleopatra in it though. Leonore Valla, she's not like known for much else. Like, no offense if you're listening, ma'am, but it's the only role I've seen her in. But she does very well. And the thing that's really interesting to me is the 1963 Elizabeth Taylor one was supposed to be even longer than what it is. It was supposed to be designed to be Caesar and Cleopatra and then Antony and Cleopatra, but they lost like 2 hours of footage, which is wild to me when you have up until Titanic, the most expensive film made. And not just because of Elizabeth Taylor getting sick in the middle of it and then actually having to like shoot on site in Italy per the doctor's orders. I mean, if I could get a doctor to prescribe me and say, Kara, you need to go to Italy. That's all I need to do. Like,
You need to go to Italy. You need this like big box of Quaaludes here. Yeah, that's it.
I need it. If any doctors are listening and you want to prescribe me with a vacation, please, I would be happy to deliver the news to my boss that per doctor's orders, I have to get out of the United States for my mental health and enjoy a nice reprieve in a post-pandemic world.
I would like that also, but any doctors also include the number of uppers and downers that Elizabeth Taylor is on as well. I would like that added to my vacation, if you will.
You know, it's interesting. So Gal Gadot is, I guess, in discussion for being Cleopatra with Patty Jenkins. Can I just say, after watching Wonder Woman 1984, okay, I'm not gonna shake it. Fuck them for that decision, because they were so disrespectful to Egypt in that film, like in a modern lens, like 110% disrespectful to the geopolitical situation that they were making very much light of in Wonder Woman 1984, and quite frankly, super, super racist. And
Actually,
I have minimal expectation for her version of Cleopatra. And I get that Cleopatra was Greco-Macedonian, but I don't have any hope for a semblance in a
the
film
weird
produced
thing
by
is,
either.
Kara, how much have we talked about like this lore of Orientalism recently in all the podcasts and interviews we've been doing? Like this.
Can I just point out that was one of my that was actually one of my topics of discussion in one of my classes, because I took a history of ancient Persia and up to modern Iran. And one of the topics I really honed in on, which my professor was very happy about, was Orientalism and how that impacted how like geopolitics worked. And it's something that gets me because it's still striking even today. Like, it's so striking. Like, you can hear it in terminology like exotic Persia. First off, Iran is a country, guys. I hate to break it to y'all, but no matter how much you don't like the Ayatollah, Iran is a country. You may not
there's still geopolitical borders that indicate that is in fact a country. I'm sorry.
And I do want to also mention, you know, there are many stateless people in this world that have their own unique cultures that deserve to be acknowledged too. That being said, in countries such as Iran.
But I just always think it's interesting how it gets applied to Egypt, and particularly how it gets applied to Egypt in the lens of Rome and Caesar, and how often we see that, like the Orientalism lens when you look at Cleopatra and when you look at everything. And I'm just going, guys, come on.
And I think Cleopatra's daughter is far more interesting. Like, that sounds really awful, but I think Arj and I have talked about the Cleopatra Selene, her daughter.
Far more interesting, yeah.
She is so interesting, and quite frankly, like, her relationship, she had, unlike Cleopatra, she ended up having a long-term, very good arranged marriage that was a love match. It ended up like, it was obviously strategized for not being a love match. It was obviously put together by Augustus at this point, but it worked brilliantly, and there is still a tomb to their love. So that being said, if you're coming out of this like, well, Caesar died, you know, Cleopatra dies, Antony dies, I will say Cleopatra Selene does have a legacy that can still be seen today, which I think is pretty cool.
The other day you were talking about her sister. Sister's almost more interesting as well. Sister is interesting.
When she was taken to triumph in Rome, they were like super pitying on her.
You have to be pretty freaking charming to pull that off.
Yeah. And she got put into a temple and mysteriously killed under dubious circumstances, because in a way that we can understand, I mean, there is sort of this protection around temples. So it is super sacrilegious, the idea of being killed on the steps of a temple. No, I do think Berenice and Arsinoe, I think. I've pronounced it both ways, but Cleopatra's family is very interesting in a very messed up Very messed up dynastic twist. But her daughter, and who would have thought Antony would have children that were functional? Who would have thought? I would have.
That's true.
It's.
He
Well, it's
probably
because
has.
he had nothing to do with
Honestly,
them.
if you would have asked him what his legacy would be, I guarantee you he would not have ever been like, my daughter. No, there's no way he would have come to that conclusion. That's what I really like about Cleopatra Selene, right? Like, she defied every expectation. And God bless Octavia, I might add. So after the circumstances, many years later at Actium, Octavian, or Augustus, who is the eventual victor and the first leader of the empire, actually has his sister take care of Antony's children by other women.
Yeah, she was
And
married to Antony, and she did a good job, a
Yeah,
wonderful
by all
job.
accounts,
Yeah.
she was incredibly. You know, that's what another thing I really like about Octavia. I think she's very understated. You know, she obviously, people act as if she's meek and mild, but think about the tenacity. Octavian seriously used her as a diplomatic tool, but she owned it. And not only that, she exceeded expectation. Like, I'm not sure if I believe Rome's take on the relationship. However, I do think they would have been close. I do think there was a strong familial bond between the two. That is admirable in a not
I
creepy,
agree,
incestuous way.
but I also want to add, Octavian probably wasn't that easy to deal with either, which makes her all the more impressive. Like, I
Can
can't
you
imagine
all the egos she's dealing with? All the egos? Also, can I just say, Cleopatra, you chose the wrong general. Not the first time, I might add. The second time. She should have gone after Agrippa. I'm just saying.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Agrippa would have handled the campaign better. That's for sure.
I love,
Yeah.
and we've kind of hinted on Parthia, but I'll put it this way: Crassus's idiotic decision is repeated by Mark Antony, and it is abysmal and a slaughter, and truly Antony proportion. Like, it shows you why he was not a great general, even if he could, in fact, muster loyalty on a smaller level. And all the people that surround Julius Caesar, that's what's funny. Caesar's legacy, despite the Ides of March, overshadows almost all of them, like, throughout anything associated with Augustus, Cleopatra, even to an extent, obviously. Modern depictions on the latter years of the Roman Republic. Like, he is a person in history that his death, like, we talk about it, we almost joke about it, like, beware the Ides of March. But I think it's one of those moments in history that is truly profound.
It's a definite turning point. Like I said, like, had he launched and been successful in his plan for the Parthian campaign, and every indication is that he probably would have been,
Mhm.
it would have changed world history, because just like removing those tribes that were coming, which was part of the plan, and then marching through Germany into Gaul, that would have been like the implications are too many to like even contemplate what actually would have happened. But we're talking about a massively different story, and most likely a royal dynasty that would have started with Caesarion after him.
That would have been interesting. And Caesarion will actually be killed, probably by, I mean, honestly, Augustus did learn, eliminate any threat. Like, seriously. The thing is, I think there's a quote that's attributed, wrongly or rightly, to Octavian/Augustus here. And it's, two Caesars is one too many. And I think that is such a perfect quote, because it will, in a nutshell, describe the problem with what will happen in the Roman Empire. When you have multiple people that, you know, the Praetorian Guard might find better choice of a candidate. When
Boy,
you
do
don't,
they.
and when, well, not the right Caesar survives, I'll put it that way. But no, I think, God damn it, I really didn't think I was going to end off the Ides of March with admiration for Octavian, but here we go. master of spin, master of propaganda, and he came out the victor, not even being a great general himself. There's something there.
Also remember, like his by the Roman people, Cleopatra was considered glamorous. Like she was that lady who lived on the mansion who the man they loved, Caesar,
She
was in love
like
with.
Sunset Boulevard,
And
basically, to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they turned that glamorous and kind of adoring image into her being a witch who had stolen the man that they loved, Anthony, and bewitched him. And forever after, right till like it's that propaganda campaign that Augustus launched to ruin her discredited all foreign women who were queens in power after
Unfortunately,
that.
yes,
Like,
it did.
what happened to Boudica is almost directly attributable to that propaganda campaign.
Yeah.
So
I mean, like it's pretty stunning.
And
Octavian,
what he was willing to do to do it. Like, for example, the whole Vestal Virgins thing and supposedly getting Antony's will. That is, first off, if that were true, that's all kinds of mini sacrilegious, right? Because the Vestal Virgins are, in short, considered nothing if sacrosanct to the Roman people. And the idea of you going in there, getting somebody's will just to expose it for, he's bequeathing these lands to his children by a foreign queen. He is not Antony, I know. I'm just picturing this unraveling in the Senate. And to me, it's almost juicier than the stabbing of Caesar. Like, is that weird?
It is. But I will say this one thing about, I think Octavian took all the lessons that everyone ahead of him failed to learn and applied them correctly.
And I think he was a master delegator in the same way Julius Caesar was, right? Like, he knew the people to have at command. He delegated them perfectly.
And he also mastered like the idea of like using people and letting them go, in the sense that like you could have a subordinate that you could villainize, like, it wasn't my fault, I'm the princeps, it was this man who did all that evil even though he had ordered it. Right? So like he was a master, like you said, a master delegator. He truly learned every lesson from history, and we know that he was steeped in it. The history of the Republic meant everything to him. So yeah, he what can you say? He was Augustus.
And I will say, Livia, to her credit, she was an incredibly interesting lady too. Like, incredibly wily. Like,
don't believe Claudius. Livia didn't kill everyone.
No. Exactly. No. I want to add, as we're wrapping up here, there's several podcasts along with Arjun's that I would implore people to listen to. One of them is the Exploress, because recently she has done a series on Roman women. Several of the women that we talked about in lightly passing today are featured on there, as well as women in the actual imperial dynasties later on. But it's a really good taste if you're interested in women's history, and we're recording this in Women's History Month. Check out the Exploress podcast. It's brilliant. That was the one that chiefly came to mind, honestly. Another one is Ancient History Fangirl. They are awesome. And if you want to hear about them talking and role-playing as the Ghost of Caesar, which is all kinds of things I like in life, then seriously check them out, because their series of like Caesar is very good. It was very nuanced too. In fact, I would argue the ultimate like ancient hybrid to me would be like Arjun times Ancient History Fangirl, because my God, they tell stories like you do, Arjun. Like,
we should do a crossover.
A crossover.
If this happens, I'm just imagining it and fanning myself in excitement, because literally everything they've put out, like talking about this era is very good. And I think any listener that was like, ooh, this is interesting, start out with Arjun's. And
I will say, let me go ahead and really, before you get into Ancient History Fangirl, and this is what I love to say about Arjun's podcast, is I am, as you all know, I have trouble with history before early modern. I do, because of the way that sources often come out, but I think Arjun does just the best job of podcasters out there that talk about ancient history. And, he's going to do other things. Like you said, you're going to go into the 20th century, but as far as interpretations of sources and picking the middle and what was most likely, I think you do an absolutely fantastic job. Love your podcast. That's why I was so excited that you wanted to do this and wanted to come on, because I knew, the sourcing is going to be the kind of sourcing I appreciate and something I can really get
Not
behind.
just
So
the narrative.
Thank you.
the
because
narrative, yeah,
Thank
the
no,
narrative,
you're
and I think of,
fantastic.
like, whenever
Thank
I've
you.
done Follow Fridays,
Flattered.
whenever I think of narrative podcasts, I'm like immediately thinking deep into history, because I think
Yeah.
you tell a story in such a unique way that pedantics would have, be completely envious of, right? Because there's so many people out there that know facts, that can spout facts, but there's very seldom that you can do that in a way that bridges the gap between the pages and the audience. So in a way,
Correct.
getting that fourth wall. And I truly think that's what your best feature is that you uniquely situate that and do that with truly such what perceived to be ease. I'll put it that way.
Well, I'm glad. Thank you so much, guys. First of all, I'm
Wow, that
speechless.
was a
Thank you.
poem. That was
But
a poem to art.
but yeah, that was my goal all along. That I want my goal when I wrote it down. I want to give a future to the past, because I feel like the humanities are kind of dying in our
Yep.
time, even though it's
It's
contrarily it's a
true.
golden age. So I wanted my episodes, after you hear them, to resonate, so that like you would remember it and be encouraged to go read more. But I feel like if I tell you a story like a lore master of old, it stays with you,
Mm.
and
Mhm.
you can go back and listen to it again, and it's like hearing it's like hearing a new thing, because you'll be familiar with it, but then you'll pick up little nuances that. And I love the idea, like, so a lot of people come back to me and they're like, they'll get one line from one book and they're like, oh, is this where you got that information from to make this leap? And I'm like, yep, that's right.
Yeah.
So
Can I just say,
it's
you and Thomas do storytelling so well. Like,
Fantastic.
Thomas with the milk. The milk. For those of you who don't know, that Thomas of New Zealand and I are dear friends and enemies, frenemies.
No, nobody is going to
Okay.
understand listening to you two. We've had so many fucking milk discussions. Like, everybody's going to be like,
Can I
what is
clarify?
these people with their milk?
Can I clarify? It's Thomas is not the only Thomas in New Zealand, but he's the only podcaster of New Zealand that I know. He does a brilliant podcast too, and I will put it together. Like, if I could put two people in a room and just watch them banter, it would honestly be
It's-
Tart. Like, Thomas,
yeah.
I almost combined your name. I almost just said Tartan.
Yeah, we have a way
You're
of pushing each
Targent.
other's buttons, but like we get angry at each other, but it's all fun.
Targent.
It's all good. It's all
You're
good. It's all
Tartan
good fun.
now. You got a
Yeah.
bromance.
I don't
Targent?
like sitting around and
Let's do it.
listening to 3 hours of banter usually, but with these two guys, I can listen to 3 hours of banter and be
Many
well
a time
amused.
travel talks, milk discussions
Yeah.
have happened.
Get on the
Many.
Time Travel Talks Discords and
Yeah,
catch
so-
me and Thomas on a Friday night when we've both had a couple of beers, and yeah, you'll be in for a wild ride, because you
Yeah,
never know where it's
maybe
gonna go.
That's
Yeah.
the best selling point for Discord, honestly, y'all. If you're listening, I'm going to go ahead and take that advantage to plug and say Time Travel Talks is a community that I've appreciated Arjun's involvement in, and Jessica's involvement, obviously. But the whole idea, and I think we can all three be in agreement here, is history
Mhm.
needs to be more accessible, right? It needs to
Yes.
be in a way
Absolutely.
that we think of it present, as you very succinctly put it, even though it's the past. Because even if a lot of traditional academia is dying, that doesn't mean we have to let history die. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to connect people that may be subject matter experts with armchair or casual historian enthusiasts. And what we've been doing, and we're recording this in March of 2021. And this month we've been doing something a little bit different. We've been doing questions each day. Instead of bombarding people on the weekends, we've been
Mhm.
spreading out different themed questions pertaining to Women's History Month. And that's what I envision more in the future of it being. getting people talking is what Time Travel Talks has been about. When I founded it with Leah back in 2019, I first thought of it in the summer of 2019. We launched our first chat last weekend of August of 2019. And we've done things ranging from Ptolemaic Egypt, funnily enough. We did that last summer.
Yep.
I remember.
Which I enjoyed that
I
because
do.
we realized that so few people know beyond Cleopatra that we had to make like all these information cards, which was fun too, because
Yeah.
it let us like dive straight into JSTOR and straight into all these interesting sources. And it connected us with naval historians I had not heard of before. So it was pretty exciting. And for anyone that's listening, if you want to be a part of a community with awesome people like Arjun and Jessica and myself, seriously, find Time Travel Talks on Twitter or the hashtag Time Travel Talks. Give us a follow. And if you have any questions on anything you've heard about tonight, feel free to at Time Travel Talks, which I run that page, Body Count, and Deep into History. We are always happy to talk history with people. And if there's something that grabbed you or you're like, ooh, I want to learn more, seriously, tweet us. We're always happy in any way, shape, or form to help whenever we can. Because anyone that has a general interest in history that's great, that's admirable, and we want to keep making connections with people interested in history and keep them talking about it, but also in a way where they can actually find what they're needing beyond. I think one of the things that's changed in 2020, and you guys might agree, and I hope this continues with the pandemic, certain stuff like on JSTOR has been more accessible with the limit being raised on certain journal publications. And then with Zoom seminars and with the advent of podcasting resurfacing, I think history is more accessible. But that doesn't necessarily mean people to talk about it with. And that's what the community is designed for. So follow us, support your favorite podcasters, I might add. One of the best ways you can do that to get off, I promise I'll get off my pulpit in a minute, but review Arjun's podcast, review Body Count's podcast. If you are enjoying it, one of the best ways that you can let a podcaster know beyond monetary support, because Arjun has Patreon as well at Deep into History, and we have Patreon. One of the most truly symbolic gestures is if you take that time to give us 5 stars and say what you like about it on Apple Podcasts or Podchaser. Seriously, it's a metric we can look at, and it's a metric we can appreciate, because I think all of us can agree sometimes when recording or writing a script, you can get lost in the narrative to the point where you're like, it feels a little lonely, or I don't know how people are going to receive it. And so it means a lot when we get those reviews, letting us know what is working.
When every review that we get on iTunes and Spotify, they have algorithms. So the more reviews we get, the more people discover the show. So if you like any podcast, I encourage you to leave a good review. Or a bad review, it doesn't matter. Each review trips the algorithm. And, if you want to complain about my podcast, go ahead.
But fine,
but the thing is, what it does is it increases the visibility of our show, which means we get more listeners. So basically, if you like a podcast, please leave a review, and they'll be able to continue making it, because a lot of podcasts don't make it. So definitely, it's a wonderful way to help.
And Arjun, so I already kind of hinted at it because you have Patreon. Where again can listeners that have enjoyed this episode find you?
You can find me at Deep into History on Twitter, at Deep into History on Instagram, and patreon.com/Deep into History. I have a exciting Patreon episode coming out probably 6 weeks.
Oh, hell yeah.
And I've been working on it for 4 months. So it's going to be the prelude to the Cimbrian War, total war. Just trust me, it is going to be the craziest Patreon episode I've ever done. And one of the best ever done, period. Because you are going to go to war with Quintus Sertorius and witness the Cimbri in all their might. It's going to be insane. Just trust me, it's coming out. And that's part of this series I called The Verses, which covers the entire fall of the Republic. So, and on the 15th, as a ode to my dear friends at Body Count, I will be taking these notes and putting out a narrative version of the death of Caesar. So let's do this. looking forward to it.
We're double dose of Caesar is what our intent is too. So we're going to be I think that'll be great because, quite frankly, I mean, how often has even a casual listener heard "Beware the Ides of March" and been like, "Well, okay, but yeah, Caesar died, but what are the ramifications?" You know, like that kind of thing. And that's what I thought. That's why when I thought about it first, beyond the date, I was like, Arjun is the best person to talk about with this because you just have such a knowledge of like the ins and outs of like the Roman Republic that makes it easy to hit the nuance. Like I felt bad bombarding you with like questions and like feeding you like
Oh,
stuff
not at all.
earlier, but I was like, I need to get everything Arjun has out here because you just seamlessly explain things.
Oh, one thing I wanted to tell you, you got both of you. You guys, you had brought up that statue of Cleopatra that was supposed to look like Venus in the Temple of Venus that Caesar built. In fact, he built a marble statue of Venus and a statue of solid gold of Cleopatra and put them next to each other. And that statue of Cleopatra stayed in Rome for the next 350 years.
That's wild. And
Yeah.
if she had truly been hated, right, wouldn't you have thought that would have been the first thing to go? Like,
right, but
it
was she there was reverence. There was definite reverence for her, and
I might add that
speaks to everything.
With religion being such an important role, it's not. We have to remember there were new cults and new deities that were being brought over, in part due to foreign influence at this time. Like the cult of Isis, not to be confused with the terror cell, but the actual goddess Isis, which was her chosen deity of choice, in the same way, in a very similar way to how Caesar's choice was Venus or Aphrodite, was his I don't know if patron's the right word for it, but the deity of choice. So it's not coincidental to me.
The Julii had long claimed descent from Venus, and it had kind of gone out of fashion, but it kind of revived. Caesar says that a lot of people think that he did it because for self-aggrandizement, but in truth, he venerated his aunt Julia Maria, Gaius Marius. He'll meet in the Eagles of Jupiter, an incredible woman, and so to him, like, she became the template of all womanhood for him. So to venerate, obviously they were descended from Venus if that was his aunt,
Yeah. And I think you're right on that count. I mean, there is a little bit of something to be said to kind of raise yourself in status to really be like, oh, we've come from this. But I think you're right, actually. That's a really interesting point, and I never thought about it that way. But yes. But again, this is why, and a lot of our listeners know, you'll know when you finally hear the interview with History of Italy podcast, how much Jessica Manor does not know until Charlemagne steps foot onto the continent. Old Charles. And I did. I called him Charlie Magnus. But that's kind of where I begin and end. And so a lot of times, a lot of people think historians or people that study history or are really interested in history just know everything about history, right? That's not the case. We all have our specializations. And so when I really want to know something, I go listen to Arjun's podcast. And that's where I pick up what I'm going to be talking about in my frame of reference.
By the way, that's the deepest of compliments, because Jessica, like she kind of already hinted at, is super selective with anything she listens to or reads about ancient history, because she's just of the mindset that, like, well, how would you know what the story's like? There are conflicting sources, and yes, there's conflicting sources in any area of study, I would suppose, but she's particularly picky with ancient history.
I am very picky. So when I give Arjun's podcast like my thumbs up endorsement, it's because he chooses sources the way I would choose them.
Awesome.
I look at them how I would look at them. Certain ones with a grain of salt, or what situationally
I like that about the way you
situationally works best. What the reality probably is, and I think you're great at that, Arjun, and that's why because I'm not ever going to bring much of it to this podcast. Sorry, listeners. I just really don't do archaic and ancient history. But if that's something you're interested in and you like a narrative and you like to be immersed in something, Arjun's who you need to go listen to. And, Kira's got more suggestions that I think are also good ones that I'm really into. But if I have to pick a favorite that I'm going to go to for ancient, more archaic, ancient history sources, is always going to be Deep into History.
Thank you so much. And also, guys, thank you so much for having me on the show. It was an honor, and this was so fun.
Absolutely.
It was truly a blast.
We're going to have you back. There's going to be something that Kara and I get an itch to talk about.
Oh, I know already.
It's going to be
I know what I want him to talk about again. So I've been on a fix with the Grocki brothers lately. Like, I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
I've been particularly interested and invested with learning about them, because I think what's been happening is, with how inescapably political the landscape in 2021 is, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, I think sometimes we do make a mistake in making parallels, but not often we do, because there are lessons to be learned from the past. And it's interesting to see like common threads of then and now, because we're all humanity. Like, that's the thing. Regardless if it's 2,000 years ago, there were still people. And I would, Arjun, if I wanted to talk about the Grocki brothers, I would be like all kinds.
Oh, for sure. We can definitely do that.
I mean, certainly.
Yeah. Absolutely. We should definitely do that sometime soon. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Like the parallels between the fall of the Republic and what's happening right now are absolutely stunning. Like, just stunning.
It's unreal. And I think what concerned me about recent
people
months
just if you just want to understand like your place in history in a kind of parallel, and what happened when a republic fell last time, listen to my series Verses, because you will really get it'll seep in. You'll see it, and I don't want to tell you, but you'll kind of figure it out on your own. I gave a talk for a charity event on Saturday, and people were kind of blown away by like how close. I don't think history repeats itself, but it does rhyme. And it's like, if anything rhymes with our time, it is the fall of the Republic.
Yes, I've been screaming this for a lot of years. This is also why I like Roman history. It is sourced and it is not sourced in a lot of ways. And I really think you've got to go, if you enjoy this, you've got to go listen to Arjun's other series, just because I would encourage people to go and see what we mean by parallels and take heed and take note and kind of,
I've got to take one thing that to give you a random like factoid of how much I enjoyed his episode. I remember when I was finishing, I believe it was Verses, and I remember listening about Marius, and I remember I was like, Arjun, I have to talk to you about this episode. Like, no doubt. Like, that night I was like, I have to chat about it. And among other things with Fail Sons. But the main point is that I was like thinking, wouldn't it be curious when you hear of like literary references to the ancient world? Les Mis, Victor Hugo uses the character of Marius. You have,
yeah.
And I was thinking so much parallel with Marius, a young Marius in history,
right?
Hugo's choice of that being a character, because when you think of In Les Miserables, when you think of like Cosette and his undying devotion to her, and then you hear Arjun talk about Marius's undying devotion to Julia, I was like, I'm not sure Hugo wouldn't have known, right? Like, so
yeah.
Therefore I was like, that was a thing I thought of just because of the way he presented the story. So random, he didn't even have to like say, oh, well, think about this. It's just the way he made me think, where have I heard this before? And that's what's great about your show, Arjun.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
I'm so glad, because everything, a lot of what happened in I don't think we experienced too much that is new, like as a species. Like, our stories have repeated, but they just happen in a vastly different world with vastly different limits on our imagination, but the emotional range of what we went through is very similar, and it resonates through time. And yeah, just like I don't like it. I never like pinning down like, okay, this is what's happening now, but it is kind of happening now. And there are lessons to be learned from the fall of the Republic and warnings from like our predecessors.
So many, because we may have advanced technologically, but we have not evolved much as a species. And that is very apparent when you look at everything that Arjun's got out there. I can't encourage you guys enough. Go and listen to that. My two go-tos are Deep into History, and then I listen to Hellenistic podcasts. Like, those are my two like go-tos for things that I am never gonna talk about. And I cannot emphasize that enough, listeners. You know, Kara might tell you a story, but I'm certainly not ever going to. Early modern and forward is my thing. So if you really want to deep dive into that, again, it's Deep into History for a reason. So,
and I just want to say, I hope our listeners are pleased by this, because we have made probably no less than 8 or 10 references, Arjun, to your podcast, and since I have joined the show, and every single time Jessica gets his face like, are we giving him free publicity again? Really? Really? And every time Elise will be like, I see what you did there, and I'll be just like smug, like
we'll just go, and now we're going deep into history, and I just look at her. It doesn't matter who the guest is, she's just gonna go, and now we're deep into history, Jessica.
And then every time Jessica's like, okay, I see you, Arjun.
I take that as a huge compliment. Thank you so much, and thank you for the free press.
And that's what's funny, because I think Thomas was listening to one of the episodes in preparation, and he's like, how many times are you guys going to plug Arjun? And I'm like, well, if I could pronounce your podcast name, Thomas, and I probably would find a clever way of doing that as well. But instead,
his podcast is wonderful, but I can never pronounce it.
No, we're getting better.
I genuinely love his podcast. I can never say the name. History.
I know. I'm sitting there like, we've recorded 4 parts with him on Globally, and I'm like, oh God, I hear him say it, and it comes out of his mouth so fast.
Oh, Tiro?
I just can't.
I don't know. I can't do it. I can't do it right. I can't even say Maori right. I realize now, in hindsight, I'm not even pronouncing that correct.
Isn't that correct though, Maori?
I
thought there's a certain the way that Thomas pronounces it. There's a certain way of emphasis that I don't think is easy
for the rest of us. Yeah, that I've kind of picked up on, and I'm going, oh shit, I guess I haven't been saying it right all this time. Well, that's fun. But that being said, guys, we're gonna wrap it up, because I love you, Arjun, but I think we've praised you enough. I mean,
yes, no, this was too much. You guys rock. Thank you for having me on.
Instead of like Dark Souls, it's like praise Arjun instead of praise.
I was gonna say that I've gotten the bronze out, and I feel like I'm fanning him as if he is a member of the House of Julie, lying on his
There is
pillows.
No king on body count.
Until there is.
Until there was.
See, we had to do the full circle here. We had to. Wait,
thanks so much, guys. Honestly, thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Oh my, Jessica will be Mark Antony running.
I can't help myself. I'm a goddamn Antony fan. I can't help it. I want to hate it, but I just can't.
That is listening, can someone please send Arjun and Jessica Photoshop versions of themselves being Julius Caesar and Mark Antony at Lupercalia, please?
Okay.
Yeah, we need that. We definitely need that.
But
that would be fun.
Please, I'm gonna put that out there. Go ahead.
Who gets slapped with the dead animal?
Jessica, obviously. No, wait, hold on.
Please Photoshop Arjun slapping me with a dead animal. Like, that is gonna be amazing. I will make it all of my profile photos.
Kaden,
no more like,
this is what we need you to do. I summon thee, Kaden.
Yeah, exactly, Kaden. This is a job for you. That being said, go follow. If you're listening to this, you're going to be able to find Deep into History, no problem. A lot of times they come up in my own search bar, right underneath us, and vice versa. I see. So
actually,
go ahead, go out and do that. Yeah, and then you can find Body Count. Of course, you guys know the spiel. at Body Count Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook now. Yes, thank you, Kara, because I'm a Luddite and Kara is a normal person.
I hate Facebook, but I'm willing to sacrifice myself to a little bit of a cause. So if y'all make my time worth it, please feel free to like our page, engage, share, importantly, because Facebook is the only thing I can say that I like about it more than Instagram is that you can share links. So if you follow the page and you see us posting a link to our latest episode, do me a solid and share it, because there's only so many times I can share and like my own posts. So
I did not know that. I did not know that, but I'm glad that I know that now. I might, if you guys do a good job, I might re-enter the world of Facebook. Maybe. Not promising anything.
As Mark Antony?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm coming as Anthony or not at all. Duh.
But seriously, thank you so much.
I'll even make my own toga. It'll be ridiculous.
My pleasure. This was great.
Can we have a body count toga party? Is that a thing?
Absolutely. That's a thing. I can make it a thing. I can be
when the pandemic's over. When the pandemic's over, we'll have a big toga party.
I know. Legend has it. Arjun's a good cook. So if we're gonna recline like Romans, we're gonna go recline like Romans near Arjun.
The legends are true.
Legends of the fall.
So speaketh the legend. You can find us again. Kara mentioned Patreon. Again, support us with those with the reviews. Give us those 5 stars. They'll give us a 1 star. Doesn't matter. Algorithm's an algorithm. If you want to let us know how you feel about the show, please do so. Although we prefer you be nice about it. So that being said, you know where to find, you know where to follow us. We're working on the website. As you guys know, that should be up this week, actually. I've gone kind of crazy working on that. You can follow all of the other episodes, and then you can find and follow me at Jessica Bead Manor on Twitter and Instagram. I'm not very active on Instagram, but I promise I will be on Twitter. As we've said before, we want to hear questions from you guys. We talk in a bubble to ourselves every week. So if you have a question, feel free to ask it. We are so excited to engage with people. We're podcasters, y'all. We talk a lot to ourselves. So that being said, we appreciate the support. Please go listen to Deep Into History. Arjun's been great. Again, we thank you. We cannot thank you enough. This has been a lot of fun. Been a little bit of a different episode for us. So we will be back at you guys next week. As always. Thank you and good night.
Good night.